Hi, I'm Emma, a 29-year-old software engineer from San Francisco. When I got home from work, I was shocked to find my bedroom door open. Instead of my neatly arranged room, there were boxes of baby clothes and a crib where my desk used to be. My younger brother Ryan, who had moved out after getting married, was nowhere to be seen. "Ryan, what happened here?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the empty walls. Ryan appeared from down the hall with a sheepish smile. "Hey Emma, surprise. Jen and I needed space for the baby, and your room is the biggest," he said. I felt upset. "You moved out my things? This is my house too. You can't just take over my space," I said. Ryan shrugged. "It's not like you need all this space. Plus, it's better for the baby." I tried to stay calm. "Better for your baby? Where are my things, Ryan?" "They're in the garage. I thought you wouldn't mind," Ryan said. "Mind? Of course, I mind. Since when did you decide to move back here anyway?" "We're tight on cash, and this place is as much mine as it is yours." Mom and Dad agreed, Ryan said. It hurt that our parents had taken his side without considering that I had been paying the mortgage and expenses for years. This wasn't just about space, it was about respect. "So you all just made this decision without talking to me?" "I pay the bills here. My money keeps this house running," I said. Ryan crossed his arms. "Well, maybe it's time you stopped. We'll take over from here." I was stunned. "You and Jen can't even handle your own rent, and now you want to handle a $66,000 mortgage? That's a joke." "We'll figure it out. We always do. Why don't you find a smaller place? It'll be quieter for you, with no crying babies," Ryan said. The conversation wasn't going anywhere, and with each word, Ryan pushed me further away. I felt both betrayed and shut out from my own home. I knew I had to make a choice, stay and fight for my space or leave and let them face the consequences of their decisions. Looking around at the remnants of my life, the choice was clear. "Fine, Ryan," I said quietly, my energy fading. "I hope you figure it out, but don't expect any more money from me." Ryan's eyes widened slightly, realizing he hadn't fully considered the impact of his actions. But it was too late. I was done being taken for granted. As I walked to my car, I felt a bit of relief from years of feeling unappreciated. They might not have valued my contributions, but I did, and I wasn't going to support people who didn't respect me. I drove away from the home I'd known as an adult, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and a new sense of freedom. A chapter of my life was closing, but a new one was beginning. As I drove through the city, the familiar skyline felt like a sign of new beginnings. For the first time in a long time, I was choosing myself, and it was both scary and exciting. The cold night air was sharp against my face as I arrived at my friend Mia's place. The drive had been a blur of streetlights and scattered thoughts. Mia opened the door before I could even knock, her face showing concern and surprise. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" she asked. I sighed, my shoulders heavy. "I did it, Mia. I told them I'm moving out and I'm not paying another cent for that house." Mia led me to the sofa and handed me a warm cup of tea. "Wow, that's huge. Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady even if my feelings were mixed. "They need to understand." I wanted them to see what life was like without me, hoping they'd finally appreciate everything I'd done over the years. Talking with Mia helped me sort through my feelings, but it didn't ease the guilt of leaving my parents or the anger toward Ryan for causing all this mess. Despite Mia's reassurances, the night was restless, filled with doubts and what-ifs. The next morning, I started looking for a new place. As I browsed listings, I realized I could afford something smaller but nicer, closer to work. The idea of living downtown, away from the tension of my family home, felt freeing. By the end of the week, I had signed a lease for a modern apartment in a high-rise with a view of the Bay Bridge. It was my own space, decorated to my taste, and it felt like a fresh start where I could redefine what home meant to me. Over the weekend, Mia and a few colleagues helped me move in. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages from my parents, who were frantic about the financial burden now on their shoulders. "Emma, please, we need to talk. We can't handle the mortgage on our own." My dad's voicemail echoed through the empty living room. I felt a pang of sympathy, but years of being taken for granted had strengthened my resolve. They had quickly and easily chosen Ryan's side, and now it was time for them to deal with the consequences of their decisions. I focused on setting up my new life, arranging furniture, and hanging art. Each piece I added felt like a statement of my independence, a declaration that I was no longer the family's fallback. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow across my new living room, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in weeks. This was my space, my choices, my life. The break from my family was harsh but necessary. I had chosen myself over the perpetual role of supporter, and though the future was uncertain, it was mine to shape. My new apartment was completely mine, and settling in felt like a breath of fresh air. Each morning, sipping coffee on my balcony and looking out over the city, I enjoyed the peace and freedom. My days were filled with work, exploring new cafes, and reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during the years of family drama. I was starting to rediscover who I was before my role as the family's financial support took over. However, as I built my new life, my old one was falling apart. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages and missed calls from my parents, who were struggling without my financial help. One evening, after a nice dinner with friends, I saw multiple missed calls from mom and dad. I hesitated but decided to listen to their voicemails. "Emma, it's Mom. We need to talk. The bank called today. They're talking about foreclosure if we can't make the next payment. We didn't realize how much we relied on your help. Please call us back." I sighed, feeling a deep sadness. It wasn't joy I felt, but sorrow for what could have been if they had valued me more. Going back wasn't an option. The next day, while at work, I got a text from Ryan that surprised me. "We really messed up. Emma, I didn't think you'd actually leave. We're losing the house because of me. I'm sorry." Ryan's message made me feel both vindicated and sad. It was the first time he acknowledged he'd taken me for granted, but his apology felt too little, too late. I replied simply, "I hope you find a way to fix this, Ryan. I'm not your safety net anymore." As weeks turned into months, my parents had to sell the house and move into a smaller, more affordable place. Ryan and Jen downsized too, moving into a modest apartment that stretched their budget. Through mutual friends, I heard about their struggles. Ryan took on extra work, and Jen started freelancing to make ends meet. They were learning the hard way about self-sufficiency and the cost of taking others for granted. Even though they were struggling, I found it hard to feel happy about their situation. There was no joy in their hardship, only a quiet recognition that this was a necessary chapter for all of us. They needed to experience life without a safety net, and I needed to follow my own path without carrying their expectations. My decision to step back had sparked change, not only for me, but for my entire family. We were all adjusting to new realities, and while the distance between us grew, so did my confidence in my choice. I had prioritized my well-being, and each day, the guilt faded, replaced by a stronger sense of self. Living in my high-rise apartment with the cityscape before me, my life found a new rhythm filled with possibilities and personal achievements. The freedom to make my own choices, free from family expectations, was exhilarating. Each day, I immersed myself in work and passions, finding joy in things that once seemed out of reach. My freelancing career flourished with the extra hours I could now dedicate. I expanded my network, took on challenging projects, and saw my reputation as a skilled software engineer grow. This success brought financial stability and a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own, untainted by family obligations or guilt. But even as I thrived, the shadow of my family situation lingered. The family home, once a symbol of shared memories and unspoken agreements of support, was sold, marking the end of an era. My parents, now living in a modest condo, were beginning to grasp the weight of their previous expectations and the consequences of their choices. One quiet evening, as I looked out over the city lights, I received an email from my mom, something I had both dreaded and anticipated. She wrote about the house sale, the pain of downsizing, and the lessons they had learned. Most importantly, she offered a heartfelt apology for taking my contributions for granted and acknowledged the unfair pressure they had put on me. Reading her words, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't the joy of vindication, but a somber acceptance of how much had changed. I replied with careful and honest words, expressing hope for their new beginning and a desire for a future where we could reconnect, not as dependents and benefactors, but as family. As weeks passed, our communication, once tense, began to soften. We shared updates and small talk, rebuilding bridges that had seemed irreparably burned. Ryan also reached out with more thoughtful and mature messages. He shared news about his growing family and new job, showing he was trying to make amends through actions rather than words. Meanwhile, I continued to build my new life. I explored new hobbies, made new friends, and traveled. Each experience added layers to my identity that were uniquely mine. I learned to balance the joy of independence with the often difficult dynamics of family relationships, the poetic justice of their situation, the consequences they faced, And the growth we all experienced didn't come with a neat, storybook ending. Instead, it was an ongoing journey of learning, understanding, and, most importantly, forgiving, at a pace that respected all our paths. In this new chapter of my life, I found not only success and independence, but also a deeper understanding of forgiveness and family love. It was a beginning that promised not just happiness, but lasting peace, shaped by the challenges of the past. And that's where our story ends. Emma learned to stand up for herself and redefine her relationships on her own terms. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Emma made the right choice by stopping her financial support, or should she have handled it differently to keep family ties intact? Dive into the comments and share your thoughts on finding the balance between personal independence and family obligations. If you enjoyed the story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories.
Doris put away the dishes, wiped all surfaces, and glanced over her workspace. Everything was in order, as usual. She valued her job greatly, as it was the only one she could get. Doris was not ugly or stupid. She had taken many online courses and could easily replace any cafe worker without harming the establishment. However, Doris was mute. The cafe owner, Mr. Sutton, thought long and hard before hiring her. Doris did not beg or kneel. She had her dignity, even if life was not entirely sweet. Before coming here, she walked around half the city. She always brought all her educational documents with her. But she was not hired for good jobs where speaking was not necessary. She was not hired anywhere at all. Frankly, this cafe was almost the last option. Mr. Sutton was drumming his fingers on the table. "You understand that I can't put you behind the bar and let you go as a waitress. I can't even make you a cook's assistant, because you won't be able to look at your notes all the time. Everything needs to be quick and clear. I have a few vacancies. I can offer you a job as a dishwasher. You don't need to talk there. Wash the dishes, and that's all." Doris tried not to show her joy and nodded. "Well, then start tomorrow. And don't be offended, but I'll keep an eye on you at first." Doris nodded again and smiled. Mr. Sutton realized from Doris's first day at work that he had done the right thing. The girl did not get distracted by conversations or run to smoke every 5 minutes, but at the same time, the quality of her dishwashing was excellent, and he never saw a pile of plates on the sink. Already, after a week, at the next meeting, he used Doris as an example for her shift worker. Lola came here through her friend's patronage, who had been working as a waitress here. Lola didn't like to work, but she got a job only because her mother made her. A meanie upstart. Doris turned sharply at these words. Lola and her waitress friend were standing behind her, both smiling. "Well, give me some answer that's at least worthy." They laughed and Doris just walked away. If God didn't give people a brain, there's no point in looking for it. 6 months passed. Lola and her friend still teased Doris, but they behaved politely in front of the boss. The rest of the workers didn't take anyone's side, just watched from the sidelines and laughed. They didn't have any special friendship with Doris. Who needs a dishwasher woman as a friend, especially a mute one? Doris was different at home. First, she was always greeted by Ollie, the cat she had picked up almost immediately after her parents' death 4 years ago. It was then that she stopped talking. Doctors treated her at first, but then shrugged their shoulders and said that this was stress, her body's reaction to what had happened, and medicine was powerless here. Doris needed a psychiatrist who specialized in this, but there were none available. For a long time, she couldn't accept it, but then she noticed that it was even more comfortable that way. She didn't have to answer those who asked how she coped with everything out of politeness. Doris was in the car with her parents, sitting in the front passenger seat, and was supposed to die under the wheels of a truck too. But she didn't like to fasten her seatbelt, even though her dad scolded her. She was thrown aside at the moment of the crash. Though bruised and cut, she survived, and her parents did not. One day, after being discharged from the hospital, Doris was returning from a walk. She had already approached the house when she heard some squeaking. She went up to the garbage cans and found Ollie. The cat was wet, dirty, and so skinny that his emaciation was simply frightening. Doris didn't hesitate to take him in, even though her allowance was barely enough for utilities and simple food. Now, Ollie was a huge, lazy, and insanely beautiful cat. He often looked out the window condescendingly at those who walked below, loved to eat, sleep, and allowed Doris to love him. She sometimes smiled, thinking that she was the one living with the cat, not the other way round. One evening after her shift, Doris left the cafe with some of her co-workers. But after a few steps, Doris suddenly stopped and walked towards a bench where a homeless man sat. Doris recognized the look he had, the same look her cat Ollie had when he sat behind the garbage bin. Lola, seeing why Doris stopped, said to her friend, "Look, Doris decided to get herself a suitor." They both burst out laughing. Meanwhile, Doris ignored them and approached the homeless man, who seemed not to notice her. Of course, she will be satisfied even with a hobo. What to do? Nature demands, and what normal guy will look at her? Lola continued to bully. "Oh, is she really bringing him home?" The girls watched in amazement as Doris helped the homeless man to stand up and led him towards her house. 15 minutes later, Doris and her guest entered her apartment. The woman helped the man undress and noticed that his clothes, that now looked like rags, were once fairly fashionable. Doris dashed to the wardrobe, pulled out her father's bathrobe and slippers, and handed them to the man. Then she pointed to the bathroom door and the kitchen. The man, who was over 50, maybe even 60, smiled. "I've understood. I'll wash up and come to the kitchen." After taking the shower, the man became literally unrecognizable, and Doris saw with relief that there was no trace of addiction or any wrong way of life on his face. She poured soup into bowls and put out bread. The man sat down on the chair and said, "Why are you so quiet, my saviour? What's your name?" Doris took a notebook and quickly wrote to him. He shook his head, upsetting. "Such a pity. You're so young and beautiful. And I'm almost like you. I can talk, but do not remember my name or surname or where I come from. So I do not say almost anything." Doris wrote, "How long have you been on the street?" The man shrugged. "About a month, maybe more. I regained my consciousness. Not here. There's a big dump outside the city. That's where the local homeless people brought me back to my senses. I opened my eyes and became scared because I didn't remember anything. Then I realized my head was pounding badly and everything was bloody. Someone must have hit me. I wanted to go to the police right away, but those vagrants discouraged me. They said they didn't treat homeless people well there. Even though I don't remember anything, it was still scary." Doris wrote again, "You don't even know if you're from this city, do you?" The man shook his head. "I don't remember anything at all." Doris thought for a moment. Over the years of silence, she had gained many internet friends. Without much thought, she took her old phone, and although the camera was not good, she still took a photo of the elderly man. Doris didn't expect anything, but she decided to try to find his relatives. She made a bed for the elderly man on the couch and wrote in her notebook, "You can live with me for now. I'll try to find your relatives." Unfortunately, her internet search did not yield any results. But Tom, as Doris called the man, did not burden her at all. It was even the opposite. When she came home from work, the house was filled with delicious smells and conversations between the man and the cat. Ollie accepted Tom unconditionally. Doris was even offended a little, because the cat now slept with him. One thing marred Doris's happiness. Lola and her waitress friend told everyone at work that she had picked up a male homeless person and brought him home because no one else would date her. Doris didn't respond. She hoped the talk would die down on its own. But every day, either Lola or her friend loudly asked, "How's your homeless guy doing? Does he stink a lot? Is he performing his manly duties?" The staff laughed so hard the chairs bounced. Doris often went to the storage room, trying to avoid such questions. It was impossible to prove anything to the taunting people with a pen and notebook. A month passed. Doris decided that her elderly guest was probably lonely. Maybe his apartment was taken away, or possibly something else happened. In none of the cities where she had friends, and she had many, were there any reports of missing people who matched Tom's description. However, one day the man unexpectedly disappeared. Doris heard Ollie's loud meowing as she was still on the stairs. She opened the door and the cat looked at her reproachfully. As Doris later realized, he was bored. He didn't understand where Tom had gone and why no one was talking to him. Doris also didn't know where her lodger had gone. The house was clean and the prepared dinner was still warm. There was a note on the table. "Doris, forgive me. I had to leave urgently. I remembered everything. We will see each other soon." At first, Doris was upset because she was so used to this man. He was about her father's age, maybe a little older. Then she scolded herself. If he left, it meant he was sure that he was needed by someone, and that's good. People shouldn't live without their relatives. Doris had no idea how Lola found out that her tenant had disappeared, but the next day when she came to work, Lola immediately started mocking her. "Doris, people say even a homeless man left you," she said, and everyone around laughed. Doris tried to pass by, but Lola blocked her way. "Tell us, why did he leave you? You're not completely ugly, and you're young, and he, as far as we could tell, was already old. Or didn't you interest him? Well, few people are interested in a silent mummy, right?" Everyone laughed again, and Doris suddenly got angry. Without thinking twice, she remembered what she had learned in the sports section in school years and showed Lola a good karate move. "Super! You know, if you hadn't done that, I would have had to intervene. I don't hit women, of course, but is that even a woman? She isn't even a human." Doris turned around in surprise. A young man was standing next to her. He lazily smiled and extended his hand to Doris. "My name is Harrison. I'm the son of that homeless man you took in." The staff left crying Lola and listened with surprise to their conversation. Doris quickly grabbed her notepad. "How glad I am that he's okay. Why did he leave without saying goodbye?" The man raised his hands and smiled. "He'll answer all your questions himself. He's at home under the doctor's observation. I came for you. You see, if it weren't for you. My wife, who will soon become my ex-wife and then go to jail, decided she had the right to decide who should live and how. Well, you'll find out everything from my dad. And by the way, he said not to come without Ollie." Doris smiled, and Harrison continued, "You won't have to come back to work here. I guarantee you that. We'll definitely cure your illness. You'll be able to live a full, normal life." He talked some more, leading her to the white SUV. She had only seen Lola once afterward. She and her husband, Harrison, came to her hometown to sell her apartment. They had to stay for a few days, and one evening they took a walk and met Lola. She did not immediately recognize Doris, and it was really hard to recognize the gorgeous woman who was arguing with a handsome man as the mute Doris. And when Lola finally understood who was in front of her, she opened her mouth, but then quickly turned around and went in the opposite direction, apparently not to get upset. Dusk slowly thickened over the city, and the citizens, as usual, turned down their TV sets and adjusted themselves to sleep. And only in the maternity ward of the city hospital was the light on, and there was a quiet conversation between the two nurses. "Ellen, how long are you going to grieve? He's gone, so good riddance," Ginny said, trying to find the right words to reassure her friend. "Yes, I understand everything. I just love him very much. I'm sure it's because I could not give him a son in 10 years. All his friends are fathers, and I'm barren. Who needs me like this at 39? Exclaimed Ellen, with tears in her eyes. "Look, a normal man will never leave a good wife. Life has liberated you from him," replied Ginny. In response to this, Ellen only kept silent. It was easy for Ginny to say that because she had a loving husband and children waiting for her at home. Ellen really did not want to go back to the apartment, where, after Paul's leaving, everything seemed so joyless. Work as a nurse in a maternity hospital was her only consolation. Every day, seeing the happy faces of parents holding their babies in their arms, Ellen felt a barely perceptible sense of envy. She wanted, just like these young mothers, to hold her baby in her arms and surround him with love and care. Ellen had dreamed of becoming a nurse since childhood. She loved to put on her mother's white chef's coat and look for a long time at her reflection in the mirror, representing herself as a nurse. Mother saw her daughter's desire and supported her certainly, and after school, Ellen enrolled at nursing school. Working in a maternity hospital, Ellen often warmly remembered her mother, who helped make her cherished dream come true. Unfortunately, an insidious illness took the unfortunate woman's life just 6 months ago, and Ellen severely suffered the loss of a dear person, and now Paul has left her for another woman. From a state of painful memories, Ellen was brought out by Ginny's voice. "Ellen, let's go to the 7th ward. There's a woman in labour brought in serious condition. They say she got sick at the train station and lost consciousness. Apparently a homeless woman. Her belly is huge. Maybe she has twins. I feel a difficult delivery is ahead of us." Ellen immediately dismissed her sad thoughts and followed her friend. To her surprise, the woman in labour turned out to be very young. She did not even look 20 years old, and she was on the verge of physical exhaustion. Ellen came up to the girl and, addressing her with care and concern, asked her how she was feeling and what her name was. In the girl's eyes immediately sparkled a light of hope that she would be helped here and would not be judged. Her name was Sandra, but to learn more, Ellen never could. Soon Sandra began having incessant contractions, and an hour later 3 twins, 2 boys and a girl, were born. The doctor, who heads the department, wiping his forehead with a damp napkin, tiredly muttered, "This is unbelievable, colleagues. In my practice, this is the first such case." Only the girl didn't look happy at all. There were tears in the corner of her huge Bambi-like eyes, and it was clear that there was not an ounce of joy in them. In the evening, when the excitement around the unusual birthing woman gradually faded, Ellen looked into the ward to Sandra. "And why are you sad, honey? You should be proud of you. Such happiness. 3 babies. Many people only dream of this." In response, Sandra wiped away a tear and, sniffing her nose, replied briefly, "I have nothing to be happy about. Some people are happy, others are not." After these words, she turned to the wall. Ellen shook her head and went to her post. The night promised to pass quietly, and the woman was spending the time reading some unpretentious novel about love. But alas, she was not destined to enjoy a book like that. Ellen, who always reacted sensitively to any noise, suddenly heard the collective crying of a few babies. Cautiously walking down the corridor, she realized that the crying was coming from the ward with 3 babies. When the nurse opened the door, she saw that the window was wide open and there was no one in the room except the 3 crying babies. Apparently, Sandra had run away from the maternity ward. "My God! How could it be? Why did your mother leave you?" whispered Ellen, taking each of the babies in her arms in turn to comfort them. Soon the news that Sandra had escaped spread throughout the maternity ward. "Ellen, your shift is nearly over. It's time to go home. Your eyes are already red from lack of sleep," said Ginny, hugging her friend by the shoulders. "Ginny, thank you for your concern, but I'll be on duty some more. I'm not tired at all. I'll sit with them. No one needs them. You know they're not your family, and they'll never be. You know that very well." "Well, good luck with that. I'm going home," said Ginny in farewell. And Ellen meanwhile continued to care for the babies, even though she had already had a legal day off, and only at the request of the head of the maternity department, the woman agreed to go home to rest. But instead of resting, Ellen went to the guardianship office to find out about her chances of adopting a baby. "Don't get us wrong, but we cannot grant your request. Your marital status does not allow us to give you 3 children to raise. You are divorced, and a nurse's salary would hardly allow you to provide for such a large family. Improve your living, family, and financial conditions, and then submit your application for adoption. The children will stay in an orphanage for now," said the child welfare officer. In frustration, Ellen went home. Such injustice could not be imagined in her mind. That day, Ellen was crying until the evening. The bitterness of being separated from the babies squeezed her heart, causing unbearable heartache. Imperceptibly, rustling the pages of a tear-off calendar, 3 months flew by. All this time, Ginny had been dissuading her friend from trying to get custody of the babies. "Ellen, please, come to your senses. Why do you need such a burden on your neck? 3 children are very heavy. You should arrange your life. But you're trying to arrange others." "You don't understand, Ginny. I love them, and I feel like they're family to me, and I have enough time to fix my personal life. confidently answered Ellen, who had been visiting the kids at the orphanage on weekends all this time. Once, on her way home from work, Ellen saw Sandra. She seemed tired and exhausted, which made her look a few years older. At first, Ellen intended to just walk by, but then, nevertheless, she approached the negligent mother and said, "Hello, I see that you do not even suffer from conscience. How is it possible to abandon your children and live on your own, as if it has nothing to do with you?" In respect, the girl lowered her eyes and, wiping away the flood of tears, said, "You see, I came to the capital from the provinces. I was 18. I was promised a job as a maid in a hotel, but they tricked me into working in... I got pregnant by a client, and they threw me out. No place to live, no money. I wanted to end my life, and I couldn't. I am weak-willed." "Do you have any relatives?" asked Ellen, shocked by the girl's confession. "No one. I'm an orphan," answered Sandra, and burst into tears. All right, sweetheart, stop it. Come with me. Stop wandering the streets, or you'll get in trouble," offered Ellen, taking the girl by the hand. Already at home, over a cup of tea, she told Sandra that the babies were named Thomas, Molly and Greg. "Are they really doing well?" the girl asked hopefully. "Yes, and I visit them from time to time," replied Ellen, who heard in the girl's voice notes of care and longing for the children. The next day, Ellen helped Sandra find a job. One of her friends worked in a supermarket and had long complained that it did not have enough cashiers in the sales area. Sandra, upon hearing this, happily jumped at the offer. "There you go, honey. See? Life is getting better little by little. Now we have to think hard about how to get the kids back," said Ellen, smiling. This time, before going to the guardianship, the woman prepared more thoroughly. She took references from her workplace and data on income. She did not forget to consult a lawyer so that she knew all the ins and outs of applying for guardianship. The guardianship service was very surprised to see Ellen for the second time, but now the woman's paperwork was flawless and her petition was approved. So, thanks to her persistence and perseverance, after a month or so, Ellen and Sandra were able to take the children out of the orphanage. Since they worked in shifts, they took turns caring for the children, filling in for each other. Time passed quickly. Before the happy women could look back, the year flew by. Sandra had already adapted to the work in the supermarket and was considered one of the best salespersons. Ellen, as before, worked in the maternity ward, helping women in labour. But only now she found meaning in her life. If before she used to come home from work to an empty apartment, now she was greeted by the cheerful hubbub and joyful laughter of children. Of course, without a loved one near, happiness could not be considered complete, but Ellen preferred not to dwell on it. As for Sandra, a pleasant young man appeared in her life. Modest girl rarely talked about him, but Ellen knew that his name was Edward, and he was a security guard at the same supermarket where Sandra worked. Their relationship developed gradually. At first, it was just shy mutual glances and smiles, but over time it came down to a first date. More than anything, Sandra was afraid that Edward, upon hearing that she was a mother of 3, would leave her. But the man, to his credit, was very decent, and he was not embarrassed by the 3 children of his beloved girlfriend. As it turned out, the guy was raised by his father, and for most of his childhood he grew up without his mother. "Are you in love, Sandra?" asked Ellen. "I am. You know, he's so nice, and he asked me to marry him. We've already set the date. It's just going to be a ceremony with friends, and then we're going to celebrate at a restaurant." "Wow, that's news! Well done. And thanks for letting me know in time, because I do not have a proper dress," said Ellen, smiling. She, who was happy that things were going well with Sandra. The month flew by, and the long-awaited wedding day arrived. At the ceremony, the young couple invited their colleagues and Edward's father and Ellen. After the newlyweds exchanged rings and went to the restaurant, Ellen decided to go home. The woman was worried about the babies, who were left in the care of a nanny. To Ellen's surprise, George, Edward's father, volunteered to escort her. "Well, what should I do here with the young people? Let them have fun," he explained, seeing Ellen's questioning look. On their way to Ellen's house, they got to talking. The man said that after his wife's death, he had not been able to tie his life to anyone. "We fought for her life for a long time, but it was all to no avail," explained the man, whose voice sounded sad. Upon entering Ellen's apartment, he immediately noticed that her house was missing a man's hand. "The hinges of your door are creaking. They need oiling. And the hanger in the hallway could fall off. Why don't I come over tomorrow with some tools and fix everything?" "Yes, I do not mind. And now there is a cake waiting for us," said the woman with a smile. The evening passed in a pleasant and comfortable atmosphere, and Ellen caught herself thinking that she had not had such a good rest for a long time. They played together with the children, and then George went home. It is worth saying that George kept his promise, and within a week he fixed Ellen's apartment. The woman was pleased to have such a welcomed and pleasant guest. Unnoticed by themselves, their relationship grew from friendly to something more, and now it was Sandra's turn to be happy for Ellen. Of course, at first Ellen and George did not show off their relationship and were as shy as teenagers, but then they announced themselves as a couple, to the delight of Sandra and Edward. "Wow! Now we have another wedding waiting for us," the joyful newlyweds exclaimed in unison. In response, Ellen and George just smiled, and 3 months later they legalized their relationship. Ellen went to live with George, who had a small house outside the city. Sandra often brought the children there at Ellen's invitation, and there, among nature and clean air, Ellen finally felt completely happy. There was a beloved man beside her, triplets whom she loved as her own, happy Sandra, whom she considered her little sister, and about 6 months later, Ellen found out that she was pregnant. It is hard to say who was most excited about this news, but they both were sure that happiness and love settled in their home for a long time. David Curry cursed again and looked around. How could he, a man who had crossed the age of 40, intelligent and successful, make such a foolish mistake? He didn't understand himself, let alone anyone from his inner circle. Lucy caught him and they had a bad conversation. It wasn't even a conversation, it was her confession. He listened silently because he knew that if he tried to say something, she would disconnect immediately. He listened, clenching his fists helplessly, and he knew that she was right about everything. But he didn't want to admit it, didn't want to let go of the pain that had been living inside him for years. He and Lucy had been together for 15 years. He thanked God every day for meeting her once, and knew for sure that Lucy would never stop loving him or betray him. But the understanding of their integrity did not come immediately. At first he worked so hard that he only appeared at home to change clothes. Lucy sighed and used to say to him, "David, we are not 20 anymore. Don't you think it's time to think about having a child?" He usually smiled, kissed her fingers in response, and said, "Lucy, why are you saying such strange things? We just need to wait a little longer, a little bit. Honestly, a few more deals and we can take a break. Then we'll think about the baby." He kept his word. 5 years ago, they were able to go on a vacation together for the first time in their married life. And when they returned, David slowed down a bit in his work. The bank worked like clockwork. The management was quite satisfied with his work. The profit was gradually growing. And now David could spend a few hours on business and all the rest of the time with his wife. But Lucy did not become happier for this, but rather the opposite. David was really hurt when sometimes she didn't want to go for a walk with him or go to a restaurant, and said she didn't need anything if he invited his wife to the mall to buy her a gift. He understood that something was happening, but was sure that she could not stop loving him. Then one fine day, when all of this had become too much for David, he sat his wife down in front of him and said, "Lucy, I can't take it anymore. I'm ready to put the whole world at your feet, and you keep turning away from me. Can you explain to me? I can buy everything you want, but you don't want anything." Lucy looked up at him. "So you can buy everything? Then buy us happiness." Only now did David finally understand the reason. "But Lucy, we still have time. It's just not working out right now. But I'm certain that we'll definitely have a baby." Lucy quietly cried. "It is too late for us. You see, I'm already 37. The doctor said there's a chance, but it's small." "But there is a chance," David tried to reassure his wife. "David, you are making fun of me. Don't you understand anything?" David jumped up. "Lucy, I also really want children. I'm very sorry that we postponed it for so long, and I don't absolve myself of guilt, but all we can do now is wait." Lucy also stood up. David, listen to me. While we wait, whether a miracle happens or not, we'll be over 40, and if it doesn't happen, let's take a child from an orphanage." David was shocked. "Lucy, are you crazy? You know very well what kind of people abandon children. Anything can grow out of such a child. No, I'm not ready for that." He saw how painful it was for his wife to listen to him, but he decided that he needed to clarify everything right away. Lucy distanced herself even more. David also suffered, but he couldn't help it. Probably he isn't a very good person. He often helped the local orphanage, but only financially. He couldn't imagine himself hugging and loving a child whose parents were alcoholics or worse. Several months had passed since their conversation, and today Lucy decided to end their relationship. She called David when he was already on his way home. "Lucy, I'm on my way home. I'll be home soon." "You don't have to hurry. I'm calling to say that I'm not at home." "When will you be back?" "I've missed you and I don't want to have dinner without you." "I'll never be back, David. I took something from my things. I'll come back for the rest later. And I'll file for divorce myself. Please forgive me and understand I don't want to and can't live like this." "Lucy, why are you saying such things? It's ridiculous. Thousands of people live without children. Let's try IVF again." "No, 6 times are enough. Please, don't look for me. Don't try to convince me. Let's just break up and not stress each other out. I'm not coming back anyway. Forgive me." She hung up and David hit the brakes. He knew Lucy very well. Calling her again now was useless. He couldn't drive in this state. He needed to gather his thoughts. In front of him was an old park, and further, as far as he remembered, there were old houses that were preparing for demolition. Just what he needed, David thought. Something gloomy and scary. He wandered for a long time. There were indeed abandoned houses with gaping holes instead of windows. Soon David realized that he was hopelessly lost. He looked around and smiled. A real dead town, almost like my soul. The next second, David realized that it could be even worse. A pack of homeless dogs was running towards him, apparently abandoned by their owners here. Since childhood, David had been terribly afraid of dogs. He never told anyone about it, but he knew that dogs always sense fear. Looking around, he realized he probably wouldn't make it to the nearest house in time. Even if he did, who's to say the dogs wouldn't follow him through a window? Panic spread through his body. The dogs were only about 5 meters away from him when someone suddenly came out with such a scream that David's ears were blocked. It was a boy who apparently knew the dogs and the area very well. He was waving something rapidly, and after a couple of minutes the pack ran off. The dogs were already barking in the distance when David came to his senses. The boy, who was about 7 years old, looked at him with interest and asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm lost," David replied. "Come on, I'll show you the way. It's not safe to wander around here," said the boy, leading the way. David walked alongside him and looked with interest at the thing with which the boy defeated the dogs. "What is that?" he asked. The boy looked at him in surprise. "Can't you see? It's my saber. My dad gave it to me a long time ago." The saber was old and rusty, but it really looked like a real one. "Yes, it's real. My dad found it when he was digging," the boy said. Apparently that explanation was enough in the boy's mind, and David didn't ask anything else, because he saw a park up ahead. "Well, you'll get there on your own," said the boy, looking at the man. It was only now that David noticed that the boy was dressed very poorly. He threw out a few bills from his wallet and said, "Here, take this as a thank you." The boy looked at the money, and David realized that he really wanted to take it. But the child only said, "Good deeds are not done for money," and just walked away. Once home, David went to the living room and sat on the couch. Nothing had changed. Everything was still clean, beautiful and cozy, and empty. The house that Lucy had so lovingly decorated now seemed unfriendly to him. "I have to go to sleep, otherwise I'll just go crazy." But he couldn't fall asleep right away. The boy was still in front of his eyes. Good deeds are not done for money. It's outstanding that such a young boy dressed so poorly had such dignity and honesty. I wonder what he was doing there among the abandoned houses, and how his parents could let him go there. Suddenly David had the thought that maybe the boy had been living there. He had heard that not all families were given housing yet, but he immediately dismissed the idea. It couldn't be. The night was restless. David was already up at 5 o'clock. Usually he came to work an hour after the bank opened, but today he arrived an hour earlier. The security guard almost fainted when he saw him. Nothing extraordinary happened. "Why are you here so early?" David smiled. "Don't worry, I have some papers to finish." David just sat in his chair and looked out the window. Of course he didn't have any unfinished papers. He just didn't want to be at home. The workday had already started at the bank. Grace, his secretary, had already made him coffee. David decided to go to the hall and see how things were going. He was walking down the hallway when he heard something happening in the hall. Almost immediately, he saw a boy waving a saber and shouting, "Please, give me the money! I need to buy medicine for my grandmother!" His voice was breaking, and it was clear that the young robber was crying. Everyone was looking at him in shock. Finally, the security guard got up and grabbed him, and then David saw the child's face. It was his savior from yesterday. "Wait, don't touch him!" The security guard dropped the boy in surprise, and he fell. David rushed to him, took him by the arm, stood him up, and led him after him. As he approached his office, he asked Grace to bring something to eat, and then shut the door behind him. "So, how should I understand this?" he asked, looking at the boy seriously. "I needed to buy medicine for my granny. She's sick, do you understand? And we have nowhere to borrow money from for another 4 days because we already owe everyone." "Do you know that robbing a bank will get you in trouble?" asked David. I know, I don't care. The main thing is for my grandmother to get better. David shook his head. What do your parents think about this? I don't know, they're dead, the boy replied. David was taken aback by what he heard, but at that moment Grace came into the office. Mr. Curry, here are the sandwiches and tea. All the cafes are still closed, so I can't offer anything else. Grace left the office and David said to the boy, Eat and give me your name. What's happened to your grandmother and where do you live? My name's Michael. We live where the dogs attacked you. Everyone has already moved away and forgotten about us. Grandma is very sick, but she doesn't tell anyone, so they won't take me to an orphanage. And yesterday she got even sicker. We don't have money for medicine, and there's some problem with the documents, so Grandma doesn't get any allowance for me. And we bought firewood, otherwise we'll freeze in the winter, so we have almost no money left. Michael spoke and quickly finished his plate, while David was shocked by what the boy had to endure. Well, finished eating? Let's go to your grandma now, David said. Michael was a little surprised by this statement and then smiled. Once at Michael's home, David realized that everything was even worse than he had imagined. The boy's grandmother was coughing heavily and almost unconscious. David called an ambulance. The arriving paramedics put the elderly woman in the ambulance to deliver her to the hospital. The boy looked at David. What am I supposed to do now? Go to the orphanage? Well, you can live with me for a while, David said, and was surprised with himself. As soon as he opened the door, David realized Lucy was home. Something delicious smelled from the kitchen, and soft music played. Michael, seeing the magnificence of the house, became shy. Lucy came out into the hallway. Hello, David. No matter how hard I tried, I can't live without you, Lucy said, and smiled sadly. David smiled. Hello, my darling. I'm happy that you realized that. By the way, I'm not alone. Lucy, meet Michael. A year passed. Lucy and David sat in the car waiting for Michael to come out of school. They were both very proud of their adopted son. Lucy and Michael's grandmother could talk for hours about his successes, of which there were indeed many, and David himself felt proud when Michael brought home another thank you note or certificate. David, I have to tell you something. I'm pregnant. And I'm scared now, Lucy said. This was great news, but David carefully asked, I don't understand. Is there something else? Aren't you happy? I'm ecstatic, but what about Michael? We won't give him up, will we? David breathed a sigh of relief and hugged his wife. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Of course we won't. Don't worry about Michael. He's a good guy, and he will be a wonderful big brother. If you liked the story, please support me with the thumbs up button. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. A young woman lay alone in a hospital bed, consumed by despair. She was exhausted from a long and painful illness, and guilt tormented her for events from years past. Memories flooded her mind, causing her to relive the moments that had changed the lives of those who were once close to her. As the academic year drew to a close, 3 college students in their second year, Leah, Wendy, and Claudia, decided to celebrate at a club. When they arrived, Leah, the most sociable and merry of the group, found them a free table and hurried to the dance floor. Being a professional dancer, she felt at home there. Her flexibility and grace caught the attention of nearby dancers, and one of them even joined her in a dance that earned applause from the crowd. His name was Simon. "Are you here alone?" her new acquaintance asked cautiously. "No, of course not," Leah replied with a smile, and seeing that the young man got upset, she added, "I'm here with my girlfriends. We have a table over there." Simon brightened up immediately and informed her that he had come here with friends as well. Since they were also a group of 3, he suggested that they sit at one table. Within a few minutes, all 6 of them were sitting together, chatting casually. Claudia had been watching Simon and Leah the entire time, but they didn't pay any attention to her. As the evening came to an end, their friends offered to see them off, but they politely declined. However, Simon slipped his business card into Leah's pocket and whispered, "Please, call me. I would love to see you again." Leah smiled in response. She liked Simon and didn't try to hide it. As soon as the girls got into a cab, Claudia couldn't stand it and began to resent the fact that they had no luck with the company today again. "In my opinion, those were cute guys. Right, Leah?" Wendy chuckled. "Did Simon give you his number? I, for example, wrote mine on Morgan's hand." "Well, yes," Leah dreamily smiled, "but I haven't decided yet whether to call him or not." "Oh, of course," Claudia suddenly snorted irritably. "You're glowing so much that it's obvious to everyone that you'll run to call him right away." There was so much undisguised anger in Claudia's voice that her friends looked at her in surprise and even asked her if she was feeling okay. Claudia didn't answer and, asking the driver to stop the car, got out halfway home. Wendy and Leah looked at each other again in surprise. "What's wrong with her? Is she jealous or something?" Wendy asked. But Leah just shrugged. All her thoughts were currently occupied with her new acquaintance. When she got home, Leah slipped into her room and fell asleep immediately, dreaming of a soon meeting with Simon. 2 weeks later, Wendy told Leah that Morgan suggested that they all meet again at the same club and celebrate his birthday. The same company of 6 people had fun at the same club again. Simon was constantly beside Leah, and Claudia still watched them with dissatisfaction, but didn't say anything out loud. 2 months later, when Leah announced to her friends that Simon had proposed to her, Claudia reacted sharply and unexpectedly. "Are you out of your mind? You don't even know him. Are you sure he really likes you?" she exclaimed. "Then why would he date me?" wondered Leah. After a moment of silence, Claudia suddenly approached Leah and hugged her, apologizing for her impulsiveness. Claudia explained that she was afraid that after so many years of friendship, they would communicate less because Wendy and Leah started spending more time with their significant others. "What about their 3rd friend, Ben? He likes you, doesn't he?" Leah whispered, soothingly stroking Claudia's back. "He's not my type. Let's change the subject. What are you planning to do today?" Leah remembered that she had a performance soon, and she hadn't chosen a costume for the dance yet. Waving goodbye and promising to meet later, she ran off. The performance went great. Leah's family and friends came to support her. Simon gave her a huge bouquet of white roses. Claudia went with Leah to the dressing room and bustled around her, helping her get ready. "Can you feel that cold draft?" Leah asked, puzzled. "You're just overheated, that's all. It's making you feel that way," Claudia reassured her and nervously laughed. "Really? Okay then," agreed Leah. "But I have amazing news. Simon came to my parents' house yesterday and officially asked for my hand. We're getting married in the fall." Claudia couldn't hide her surprise, but quickly pulled herself together and congratulated her friend with a forced smile. The next day, Leah didn't come to the college. As her parents reported, she started feeling unwell at night and got to the hospital with a diagnosis of pneumonia. Simon learned about this from Wendy, who told him that Leah most likely caught a cold after performing. The guy immediately rushed to the hospital and ran into Claudia there. "Hey, Claudia," he exclaimed. "Have you seen Leah? How is she, and where can I find her?" "Yes, we just saw each other," Claudia answered cheerfully and waved her hand down the hallway. "Her ward is over there. She said today they should get the test results." Simon didn't listen any further and ran in the indicated direction. Although Leah wasn't in the ward, Simon found a stack of papers with test results on the nightstand. He automatically grabbed the top sheet, which had Leah's name on it, and saw that it was a test for HIV and syphilis. The results were positive. Horrified, he stood there, looking at that awful sheet of paper, not immediately noticing that Leah and a nurse had entered the room. "Simon, it's good that you came," the girl exclaimed. "Are you okay?" she asked anxiously. "You're still asking," he said angrily. "How can I be okay when my fiancé hid something like this from me?" he shouted and threw the papers in Leah's face. The terrified girl didn't understand what was going on. She tried to ask Simon about it, but he refused to explain anything. "You know everything yourself, and forget about my proposal. Got it? Goodbye," he said coldly before slamming the door and leaving the room. Leah had a real hysterical fit, and the nurse asked her parents to watch over her. "Understand, she's not our only patient, and I'll have to answer for her antics later," the nurse said. "What happened?" Leah's mother asked anxiously. "She took plenty of pills," the nurse whispered, checking the IV. Fortunately, a neighbour in the ward noticed empty blister packs under the sheet. We managed to wash her stomach and got her out of the world. Meanwhile, at the bar, Claudia ran into Simon as he was finishing his next glass of beer. "Simon, what's wrong with you?" she asked, surprised. "You know everything, right?" he replied. "And where did she catch these disgusting diseases? I thought I found a normal girl to marry, but she turned out to be like this." "If I told you, would you believe me?" Claudia angrily retorted. "No one believes me. That's just my fate." Simon laughed bitterly. Drunkenly, he suggested that Claudia go with him, and she agreed. 2 weeks later, Leah appeared at the college, intending to transfer to another place. Claudia and Wendy tried to dissuade their friend, but she had good reasons to leave. "I feel bad here. I don't want to live when I think about him," she said listlessly. Leah left for another city, and meeting new people and studying helped her come to her senses. She eventually graduated successfully as a specialist in Eastern languages and received an offer to do an internship in Korea, which she gladly accepted. Wendy learned all of this from a letter Leah finally wrote to her. Wendy was happy that her friend was doing well, but she couldn't be happy for Claudia, who invited her to the wedding with Simon. "I understand everything now. Did you break them up just so that you could marry him?" Wendy whispered in shock. "What does that have to do with me?" Claudia pretended to be outraged. "You better tell me. Will you be a bridesmaid at my wedding?" "Enough with the lies. Of course I won't tell Leah anything. I don't want her to get hurt again. But sorry, I won't be at your wedding." Claudia snorted and laughed in response. After the wedding, Claudia enjoyed the success of her personal life for a while. However, she began to notice irritation in Simon's eyes when her attempts to get pregnant ended unsuccessfully. She knew her husband wanted children badly, and she was afraid of losing him if she couldn't give him a child. Finally, Simon forced Claudia to undergo an examination which revealed that she was infertile. Since then, Simon often stayed at work, came home smelling of feminine perfume. 2 years later, he simply packed his bags and left for another woman, who was expecting his child. Claudia cried in her empty apartment, sincerely not understanding why all of this was happening to her. One day at work, she suddenly felt sick and passed out. Her colleagues called an ambulance, and in the hospital she was diagnosed with a brain tumour. Surgery was impossible, and Claudia faced painful chemotherapy treatments. One day, Simon visited Claudia in the hospital. He appeared depressed and unkempt, as if he had aged several years. He burst into tears and talked about his child's autism and his helplessness to cure him. Claudia was silent for a moment, then tearfully asked for Simon's forgiveness. Simon incomprehensively looked at his ex-wife, and with tears in her eyes she explained. "It was me who had switched the form with Leah's tests back then. It was not her result, but a one-named woman from another department. Simon was shocked. "We got what we deserved," he said after a minute of silence, and left the ward. Wendy couldn't help but tell Leah about Claudia's illness. After struggling to find her friend's phone number, she asked Leah to come over, revealing that Claudia wanted to talk to her about something. Leah, who had a happy marriage, 2 wonderful boys, and a rich, positive life, promised to come and hung up. When she arrived in her hometown, she met with her parents and Wendy, and then went to the hospital to see Claudia. At the sight of her long-awaited friend, Claudia burst into tears and begged for Leah's forgiveness. "Why?" the woman asked, not understanding anything, and affectionately patted her friend on the shoulder. And then Claudia told the story of how she had separated her from Simon out of jealousy. She felt very surprised when Leah, listening calmly to her story, said, "You know, I can't forgive you, because if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have left, and my life wouldn't have turned out so happily." As Leah was leaving, Simon entered the ward. Realizing who was in front of him, he attempted to hold the woman back. "You know, she orchestrated everything back then, don't you? What she did is one thing, but how you behaved is entirely different. You didn't want to explain or find out the truth back then, so it wasn't important to you. It hurts me, but it's all in the past. Goodbye," she said, and left without even looking back. Simon watched Leah leave, realizing she was truly happy without him. Understanding that he deserved it all, he leaned to the wall, feeling powerless. Norman stopped the car on the side of the road and got out to stretch his legs. The road was long and tiring, and Norman felt like he would fall asleep any moment. A short break was essential for him, since he had been driving for almost a day. He had less than 100 kilometers left to the village he was heading to, but they seemed truly endless to him. If it weren't for the business he had to finish there, Norman would never have driven so far. He used to live here with his grandparents. Then came the army, and after that, a new urban life and a job as a driver in the large company's fleet. There was also Connie, his first love. They dated for 2 years and planned to get married, but fate decided otherwise. Connie's parents categorically did not want Norman as their son-in-law and did everything to separate him from their daughter. They insisted that Connie go study in the regional centre, and they were not at all concerned about Norman's sorrow. People say that time heals, but it never happens quickly. Only with the appearance of Melissa did Norman feel that the wounds in his heart were gradually healing. Melissa was impulsive and restless. She always brought noise, laughter, and bustle with her, but Norman liked it. Each of their meetings was like a real volcano of emotions, and the epicenter, of course, was Melissa. Connie was different, smiling but calm and sensible. But why remember her if everything is already in the past? Norman stretched until his bones cracked and began to stretch his neck, turning his head from side to side. The sun was already setting, sending its last rays to the ground, and he noticed something shiny in the withered roadside grass. Norman took a few steps towards his find and saw a golden chain with a beautiful gold cross studded with precious stones that lay under his feet. He picked up his find and examined it, marvelling at its beauty and elegance. Then he got back to the car and, invigorated by the extraordinary adventure, he easily covered the remaining kilometers to the village. Norman's native house greeted him with silence and the musty smell of an uninhabited building. It was sad to walk through empty rooms that reminded him sharply of the years spent here, of his grandmother and grandfather, who loved their only grandson madly. Norman hardly remembered his mother, who died when he was very young. In his memories, only her hoarse cough arose, but her face seemed like a blurry spot. Even in photographs, he did not recognize his mother in a beautiful, young, tall woman, but his grandfather and grandmother were still like alive in his mind. Norman was lost in thought when someone knocked on the door. He went out to open it and saw elderly Mrs. Gilliam on the doorstep. "Hello, Norman." She hugged him. "Oh, I was wondering, is it you who came or not?" "It's me, Mrs. Gilliam." Norman smiled at her. "Have you come to visit the graves? Or forever?" the elderly woman asked, walking into the kitchen and sitting down at the table. "Not forever, Mrs. Gilliam," Norman said, filling the kettle with water. "I'm thinking of selling the house. Life is expensive in the city. There's not enough money. The salary is not great." "Oh, how sad," sighed the woman. "It's so good here. Peace, nature, people are all like relatives to each other, not like in your cities." "But there is no work here. How do you live?" Norman smiled sadly. "Like everyone else," the woman replied. "The main thing is not to be lazy, and it's good for children to grow up in the village. But why am I telling you this? You grew up here yourself, you know everything, and it's your business where to live. If you want to sell the house, then sell. There will be interested buyers. Not right away, of course. It's not a district centre here, but with time, and meanwhile you can take in some lodgers." "Lodgers here in the village?" Norman asked. "Well, there's this young woman with a child. She's been allowed to stay in Mr. McAuliffe's guest house in the yard, but there are no good conditions there, and winter is coming." "I don't know," Norman shrugged. "I wasn't thinking about lodgers. I guess I'll sell it after all," said Norman, and absent-mindedly pulled out the cross he had found earlier, which he had already forgotten about. "Wow, that's a thing," Mrs. Gilliam exclaimed, unable to resist. "It's expensive, you can tell right away. May I see it closely?" The elderly woman put the cross in her palm and began to examine it closely. "Where did you get it?" she asked, admiring the play of light on the stones. "I found it by the road today," Norman explained. Mrs. Gilliam screamed and dropped the jewellery, hastily wiping her hands on her apron. "Throw it away," she advised Norman, or take it to the church, but don't keep it for yourself. Do you hear me?" "Why?" Norman was surprised. "Don't you know? It's dangerous to pick up someone else's cross. You can take on all the sins of that person. You'll get sick, misfortunes will start to follow you, and who knows what else," the elderly woman answered. "You're making it up, Mrs. Gilliam." Norman brushed her off and put the cross back in his pocket. But the elderly woman continued to babble and told him all kinds of horror stories, trying to dissuade him from his rash act. When she left, Norman was not immediately able to push away the unpleasant thoughts that Mrs. Gilliam had planted in him, but then he laughed anyway, calming himself down. What nonsense! This is the 21st century, and superstitions continue to live on and multiply. Cross costs a lot of money. Who will call me smart if I refuse it? Oh, Mrs. Gilliam, what a fantasy! That night Norman couldn't sleep for a long time, but his thoughts were not about the valuable find, but about his home, his grandmother and grandfather. Memories of his childhood kept him awake, and Norman fell asleep only towards morning, calming himself with one single thought. He would not sell this house. He couldn't do it. He would not betray the memory of his ancestors. His heart became light and he fell asleep, content with the decision he had made. He spent several days in his hometown, preparing it for the cold weather. He mowed the grass, swept the yard, did some repairs and fixed the gate. Mrs. Gilliam came to see him all the time, bringing him something delicious, treating him to fresh milk. On the last evening before Norman's departure, she brought a woman in her 30s with her. "Norman, this is Lauren," she said. "I've told you about her. Let her stay in your house for the winter. You live in the city anyway, and she'll look after the house. Don't worry, she's kind and good. She likes order and takes care of things. Everything will be fine, and you can work out the payment somehow." "I have a little money," Lauren said. "If you, Norman, allow me to live here, I'll give you an advance. It's not much, but I'll earn more." "Lauren sews well. All our women come to her with their needs," Mrs. Gilliam explained. "That's how she earns a living." "I see." Norman nodded and smiled at the embarrassed woman. "Live for free then. Just keep things in order here and pay the utility bills on time, so I don't have to pay anything." Mrs. Gilliam clapped her hands. "And it's so nice of you. That's who I call a knight," she laughed. "No," Lauren blushed. "It's embarrassing. I can't allow it." "Come on," Norman waved his hand. "I can see you have no money. I'm not a wealthy man either, and grew up among ordinary people. So I understand you. Come in the morning. I'll give you the keys and leave, and you'll live here." Lauren smiled gratefully at him and, overcome with joy, hugged Mrs. Gilliam. "That's fantastic news," said the old woman, patting Lauren's shoulder. "And you, Norman, with your good heart, will surely find happiness soon." Lauren had already left the house, but Mrs. Gilliam slowed down and, turning to Norman, whispered to him, "Throw away the cross. Listen to me." Norman returned to the city the day before Melissa's birthday, and she ran happily to him and threw herself into his arms. "My Norman, I missed you so much. So, did you sell your old house?" "No," Norman smiled, kissing the girl. "I didn't sell it. You know, I just couldn't for some reason. Memories came flooding back, and I couldn't deal with them. In short, I decided to keep it." "Norman," Melissa said, disappointed, "but I thought—" "Tomorrow is my birthday." "Yes, my sunshine, I remember everything," Norman said. "But what does the house have to do with it?" "Well, I just wanted you to buy me a good gift, something nice. Let all the girls be jealous. Tom brought Molly an expensive new phone. Willie bought a golden bracelet for Sarah's birthday. And what about me? Am I worse than them?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. Norman thought about the new purse and perfume bottle that he had already prepared for her as a gift, but Melissa's words instantly devalued his efforts. However, when she mentioned gold, he thought about the cross and smiled. "Let's not rush things," he said to Melissa. "I think my gift will definitely make your friends envious, although I don't understand why you need to." "All girls are like that," sighed Melissa. "We want to have the best of everything, that's all." She paused for a moment, then asked again, "So you really don't want to sell the house?" "Maybe it's a mistake. We'll need money for the wedding." "I let a tenant in there," Norman explained. "Oh, well done," exclaimed Melissa. "How much will he pay?" "Nothing," Norman shrugged. Suddenly these questions became unpleasant to him, and he hurriedly changed the subject. "What time are your guests coming tomorrow?" "At 7, Melissa smiled. "And don't be late." Norman's gifts caused a real sensation. Of course, he decided to tease the girl and first gave her flowers, a purse, and perfume, watching with interest as Melissa's face fell. Yes, she wanted exactly those things, and had shown Norman these items in shop windows more than once, but now she was waiting for something more. And when he put a diamond-studded cross around her neck, she screamed with delight. The girlfriends surrounded the birthday girl and enviously examined the beautiful piece of jewellery, exclaiming in admiration. But when they asked Norman about its cost, he just joked and didn't admit that he found it accidentally. The evening was a success. Melissa was glowing with happiness, finally surpassing all her friends. When she was alone with them, she once again demonstrated the preciousness of the gift. "I think you're rejoicing in vain," Molly said sarcastically. "Where did your Norman get so much money? He's not Rockefeller, just an ordinary driver." "Norman works as a taxi driver at night," Melissa said, but the girls just laughed. "Yeah," Sarah laughed. "A taxi driver is so cool. Maybe I'll tell my Willie to quit his job and become a taxi driver. They must be richer than padishahs, giving away such precious things left and right." "Precious things?" Molly exclaimed. "Just ordinary jewellery. Maybe he bought it from the gypsies, that's all. Or maybe it's even a fake." Melissa even blushed with offence and anger. She was prepared to argue with her friends, but Sarah had a suggestion. "Go to the jeweller in the morning and have him evaluate the cross. If it's real gold and diamonds, I will be the first to apologise to you and Norman." "I will do that," Melissa said, narrowing her eyes. "And all of you will apologise to me. Got it?" She lifted her head high and returned to the other guests. Her friends had no choice but to follow her. Melissa could hardly wait for the morning, and as soon as the workday began, she hurried to the jewellery store. A handsome man in his 40s or early 50s greeted her. "What can I offer you, miss?" he asked. "I'm not here to buy," explained Melissa. "I would like to know whether this is a real thing or not. Who can help me?" "I can," the man replied. He invited Melissa to follow him to his office. On the way, she took out a box in which the cross and chain lay. When the door closed behind them, she handed it to the jeweller. The man's face changed instantly. At first he showed surprise, then confusion, and then a whole series of other, no less powerful emotions. With trembling fingers, he touched the cross and suddenly raised his hand, pressing it to his mouth, not allowing a cry of despair and pain to escape. Melissa could not take her eyes off him. She already understood that something was wrong and wanted to take her thing and run away. But the jeweller grabbed her by the arm. "Where did you get this cross? Where did you get it?" he demanded. "Let go of me, it hurts," cried Melissa, who was completely frightened. But he did not only not let her go, but dragged her to the couch and sat her down. "I repeat, where did you get this cross?" "My boyfriend gave it to me for my birthday yesterday. His name is Norman." Melissa burst into tears. "This is my cross. Give it back to me and I'll leave." "No, you're not going anywhere until you tell me everything," the jeweller continued to shout. "Call your Norman right now. Let him come here, or I don't know what I'll do to you." "I don't understand anything. I'm not guilty of anything," Melissa cried, waiting for Norman to answer her call. "Norman!" she shouted when he finally picked up the phone. "What did you do? Where did you get this cross?" "The one you gave me. They want to kill me because of it." Norman was stunned, hearing Melissa sobbing and screaming. "Wait, I don't understand what's going on, Melissa. Where are you?" At this moment, the jeweller snatched her phone away. "Hurry up and come here, or I'll call the police. Understand?" he hissed. "Where should I go?" Norman asked, suddenly becoming calm. If this guy is talking about the police, then he's not a criminal and can be dealt with. Within 10 minutes, he had arrived and was standing in front of the angry jeweller, looking him in the eye. "I found this cross," Norman told him. "I found it by the road accidentally. Now, will you tell me what is wrong with it?" "I made it," the jeweller explained, suddenly weakened and sat on a chair. "Both the cross and the chain belong to my wife. It was my gift to her." "I don't understand," Norman said. Was it stolen from your wife? No, the jeweller shook his head. She disappeared a year ago. She went to the store and never came back. My wife was pregnant. Oh my God, if you only knew how I looked for her. I did everything I could, and even more. But she disappeared as if she were never in this world. We were supposed to have a son, my son. I loved her and my unborn baby too. We had a family, a real family, and now I'm alone. And worst of all, I don't understand what happened to her. The jeweller covered his face with his hand. Melissa and Norman exchanged glances. What's your name? Norman asked the man. Seth. Norman introduced himself and his fiancée, then continued, Don't think I'm lying to you, Seth. I really found your cross, far from here. Norman was telling the details, walking around the office in excitement. Suddenly his gaze fell on a portrait of a woman that was on the jeweller's desk, and he cried out, It's her! Who? Seth jumped up, like he was stung. Lauren, my tenant. I let her into my country house. She lives there now with her baby. Oh my God, Seth exclaimed. Let's go. Let's go there right now. He rushed to the door, but immediately collided with Melissa. Wait, what about my cross? I want it back, Melissa demanded. Melissa, how can you? Norman widened his eyes. You've heard everything. It's Lauren's jewellery. So what? I want it back. I don't care where you got it from, but it's my gift from you. Seth led her to the salon. Here, choose any jewellery instead of the cross. Don't be afraid. This salon is mine. I own it and can make you such a gift. Melissa chose beautiful earrings and was very pleased with the exchange, although she regretted the exceptionally beautiful cross that no longer was hers. Norman suddenly felt ashamed of the girl's actions and turned away from her to hide the disappointed expression on his face. Seth didn't care and gave some instructions to the two saleswomen before hurrying out onto the street towards his car. Let's go, he nodded to Norman towards his expensive car. Wait, I can't do that. I need to ask for some time off work and everything. Seth sighed in disappointment, but had to agree. They left the city only in the evening. Lauren was putting her son to bed when she heard the gate creak and someone walking through the yard. The woman hurried to the door, asking cautiously, Who's there? Lauren, Norman replied. It's me, Norman. Please open up. Norman? The woman was surprised, and when the door opened, she screamed, realizing that not only the owner of the house was in front of her, but also her husband. Seth, how did you get here? Why did you come? She pressed her hands to her chest. Lauren, my dear, I was looking for you. You disappeared. I couldn't find peace. Why did you leave? Don't you know how much I love you? The woman's lips trembled as she burst into tears. I had seen your love. I came back home when you were there with Charlotte. You were kissing and didn't see me, but I saw you, Seth. I couldn't bear it, and that's why I left. My silly girl, Charlotte is nobody to me, and there was never anything between us. I didn't cheat on you, Lauren. She came to me and started kissing me herself, but I drove her away because I don't need anyone but you. I love only you and our son. Please, show him to me. Where is our son? Norman, present at this family scene, felt improper and quietly left, giving the couple a chance to reconcile. He went to Mrs. Gilliam and told her about his adventure. An hour passed before they both came to Lauren and Seth, who were sitting holding hands. So, what about the cross? Mrs. Gilliam couldn't help but ask. How did it end up by the road? I was pregnant when I left home, Lauren said. I had little money with me and bought a bus ticket wherever it went, but I felt very sick, and I was vomiting all the time, and the driver had to stop a few times for me to get out. I didn't even notice how the clasp opened and the cross, which was heavy, slipped to the ground. This is the most amazing story I've ever heard. Norman shook his head. It's good that it ended well. Mrs. Gilliam smiled. Well, and you said that finding crosses is unfortunate. He winked at her. I was right a little. You've told me today that you've parted with your bride. Is that good? Of course, Norman exclaimed, and I'm truly grateful to fate for showing me what Melissa really is. By the way, she wasn't even upset when I told her I was leaving for the village forever. She just called me a fool and added that she would find a better groom. Well, and you'll find someone better. Seth patted his shoulder. And I wish you to have such a real love as we have with Lauren. I already had a real love. Norman sighed, remembering Connie. Don't be sad, Norman, Mrs. Gilliam told him. Happiness will find you here too. The next day they saw Seth and his family off, loaded with village gifts. So you're not coming back? Seth asked. No, Norman shook his head. I only now realise that I'm a villager. And you come to visit me. Fishing, nature. We'll have a great time. Seth promised to visit and warmly said goodbye. The next evening, someone knocked on Norman's door. He opened it and froze on the threshold. Connie was standing in front of him. Norman, I'm here for you. Forever. I love you and can't live without you. Norman didn't say anything, stepped towards her and hugged her, burying his face in her hair, smelling of flowers and sun. Happiness finally found him, and it won't leave his home any more. Norman knew that for sure. Donald stretched himself with pleasure and looked out the window. The weather was fine, the birds were chirping loudly, and the first rays of the warm summer sun were stubbornly breaking through the slightly closed blinds, promising a great day off. The man turned and looked fondly at his wife Beatrice, who was sleeping soundly. He smiled and once again thanked fate for the fact that he had met this wonderful woman. He wanted so much to hold her tight and kiss her, but he could not allow himself to disturb her when she was sleeping so sweetly. He could only lie quietly beside her and silently admire her beauty. They had met 2 years ago at a birthday party for his neighbour Cara, whom he had known since high school. There were not many guests at Cara's apartment that day. Donald poured himself a drink and began to get to know the rest of the company little by little, while Cara was following him everywhere. She tried to please him, laughed at every joke, and often touched his arm as if accidentally embarrassing Donald. 2 hours had passed since the party had started when suddenly the doorbell rang. Cara rushed to open it, and Donald asked one of the guests in surprise if anyone else was supposed to come. Beatrice must have come, smiled Donald's interlocutor. And who is she? She's perfection, sighed the guy. Donald was intrigued, and when a charming girl in a flying soft cream dress entered the room, he realized that his acquaintance was right. Beatrice really was incredibly beautiful. Donald was standing on the sidelines, occasionally exchanging boring phrases with Cara's classmate, when he was suddenly run into by someone pouring a cold drink on him. Thanks to his reaction, he managed to catch the girl who had swooped down on him. "Be careful," responded Donald calmly. Beatrice's beautiful, guilty eyes were looking at the guy. "I ruined your shirt," muttered the girl. There was a huge red stain on Donald's clothes. "It's okay. I live upstairs. I'll go change." Beatrice sighed in relief. "May I come with you? I feel terribly guilty." "Don't worry so much. It's nothing," answered Donald, trying to reassure her, and headed to his apartment. Beatrice quietly followed him. While Donald was changing, Beatrice was waiting for him in the living room, where she was looking at the pictures. On one of them, Donald was with his cousin. "I've always dreamt of having a sister," Beatrice said sadly when Donald returned. "But my mother never married after my father had left, and she raised me alone, so the dreams remained dreams." "I'm so sorry." Donald wanted to encourage her, feeling her loneliness keenly. "Well, what do you say if we don't go to Cara and stay at your place? This party's getting kind of boring," said Beatrice, and came so close to the guy that he felt her hot breath. "Do you have tea?" she asked with a smile, and without waiting for his answer, went into the kitchen. Donald was delighted at the idea, wishing in his heart that she would never leave him again. And so it happened. Beatrice stayed with Donald, and for over 2 years they have been happy together. Suddenly Beatrice opened her eyes and smiled at her husband. Donald leaned over to his beloved, kissed her, and gently touching her round belly, asked, "How is the best woman in the world and mother-to-be feeling?" "Fine," whispered Beatrice, and put her husband's hand on her belly. "Have you felt it? Our baby's awake too," she smiled, "and that means it's time for breakfast." Donald gently touched his spouse's belly with his lips and joyfully hurried to prepare breakfast for her. It should have been a usual day off. Donald was going to visit his parents at their summer house in the countryside. His father and mother had moved there 3 years ago. Beatrice had not been going with him for the last month. Donald returned from his parents' house only late at night, but to his surprise, Beatrice was not home. Anxious, he called his mother-in-law, Mrs. Mitchell. She didn't pick up the phone for a long time, and when Donald finally heard her distressed voice and poorly restrained sobs, a bad feeling hurt his chest. "What's the matter with Beatrice?" asked Donald in a trembling voice. "She's dead, Donald." Mrs. Mitchell could barely speak. "Some drunk driver hit her in a crosswalk." Donald could not accept the death of his beloved. A deep wound gaped in his soul. Everything around him had become indifferent. Neither Donald's parents nor Beatrice's mother were able to pull him out of the pit of depression. Running away from reality, Donald began to drown his sorrows in alcohol. He had never had this addiction, but now it was his only salvation. He often visited the grave of his wife and unborn son, talking to them and weeping bitterly. On one of the usual evenings, which Donald used to spend alone with a bottle and looking at his wife's pictures, Cara showed up on the doorstep of his apartment. She said she had come to support an old friend, and Donald found no strength to resist. He invited her to keep him company and put a glass of whiskey in front of her. "Rest in peace, Beatrice," Cara said, and drank the whole glass. Cara spent the evening with Donald, let him talk, cried with him, poured more and more whiskey for him. When Donald fell asleep, Cara did not go back to her place, but stayed at Donald's place. In the morning, when the man hardly opened his eyes and felt a hellish headache, Cara brought him some broth and persuaded him to eat. After taking the last spoonful, Donald felt better. Since then, Cara began visiting him frequently. Donald felt that Cara understood him, that she was ready to share his pain, and that he no longer needed to be alone. There was no disappointment or acute pity in her eyes, like in his parents' or Beatrice's mother's. He had been alone for a year and felt an intense lack of a woman's warmth and tenderness. Donald felt she liked him and decided to start a relationship with her, but soon realized that he had made a mistake. Having got what she wanted, Cara quickly showed who she really was. She liked to have fun and spend money, but Donald was not comfortable with that way of life. The man had to quit his high-paying job because of the depression, and his income was low now. But Kara demanded more and more money from him. The woman increasingly began to accuse Donald of being unable to provide for her, and most of all, she was irritated by his memories of his late wife. "That's it. I'm sick of it," she shouted one day, coming in tipsy from the bar. "Look what you've turned into. How long are we going to remember her? Get over it. You won't find another one like her. What's wrong with me? We've been together for a year and we're still in the same place." Kara stared angrily at Donald, and then the man, glancing sadly at Beatrice's picture, suddenly said, "You're right. You'll never replace her for me. I'm sorry, but we have made a mistake. We shouldn't continue our relationship." Kara became hysterical. The woman swore, shouted curses at Donald, humiliated and insulted him in every imaginable word, beat the dishes, but in the end, achieving nothing, left his apartment in anger. Donald had never spoken to Kara again, but her words really touched a nerve. For the first time, he realized the mess he had made of his life, the way he had sunk, and he became deeply ashamed. He knew that Beatrice would definitely not approve of this, so, sobbing over his wife's picture, he gave her his word to pull himself together and make things right. From that day on, Donald never touched the bottle again. 5 years passed. Donald came to his senses, got his job back, and started earning good money. He began to communicate with his family again, tried to live an ordinary life, except that he did not believe that he would ever find love again. The pain of losing his beloved dulled, but on anniversaries the man still used to visit his wife's grave, bring her favourite chrysanthemums, and talk to her a long time. One day, Donald was coming home from the grocery store. He was going to cook one of Beatrice's signature dishes, to remember once again the time when they were so happy. As he crossed the square, he suddenly heard an incredibly beautiful singing that gave him goosebumps running all over his body. The voice was female and sounded familiar to Donald. He looked at the singer, wearing dark glasses, and suddenly stopped, unable to move. His heart was pounding frantically, his head rumbled, and in a second, Donald was next to the woman and had her in his arms. "Beatrice, my darling, how is it possible?" Donald was looking at the street singer with distraught eyes. "Let go of me," shouted the young woman, frightened. "My name is Lauren, not Beatrice. You must be mistaken." Donald came to his senses a little, and scrutinizing the woman, he noticed that she was looking at him strangely, as if through him, and suddenly he realized that she was blind. "I'm sorry, you look so much like my dead wife, just the same face," said the man, still not understanding how this was possible. Lauren didn't know how to respond. Then Donald approached a passerby and showed him a picture of his wife, asking him to confirm that there was a resemblance between her and the woman in the square. The man was very surprised and said he thought it was the same woman. "Have you heard?" rejoiced Donald. "I have not deceived you. But how is that possible? No, we must solve it." Donald took Lauren to the bench by the fountain and asked her to tell him about herself. The young woman admitted that she was blind from birth, grew up in an orphanage. Her mother left her there when she found out about her illness. Lauren sadly sighed and added that it was hard to live alone and blind, and it was almost impossible to find a job, so she had to sing in the square to get at least some money for food and clothes. "You have a stunning and unusual voice," said Donald excitedly, "and Beatrice has never sung. Perhaps she should have developed her skills. What if you and Beatrice are sisters? I think there's only one person who can help us figure it all out. Donald suggested that Lauren go with him to Mrs. Mitchell, Beatrice's mother. The girl thought about it and agreed, but on the condition that Donald would take her back to the same place after that. As soon as Mrs. Mitchell saw Lauren, Donald knew that they were about to discover a secret, and he was not mistaken. Mrs. Mitchell told them that her husband left her when she was still carrying her daughters under her heart. The woman was left all alone, but there were no relatives to help her, and she did not know whether she could cope. And when she found out about the congenital disease of one of the girls, she was afraid that she would not be able to give her proper care, and decided to leave her for her own good. She was hurt, ashamed, and suffered madly, but she never decided to take back her abandoned child, and never revealed her secret to anyone. Mrs. Mitchell fell on her knees before Lauren, burst into tears, and begged her forgiveness. Lauren could not hold back her tears either, and embraced her mother. They were talking the whole evening. Looking at her, Donald, for the first time, felt that his heart did not hurt anymore, and his soul was somehow calm and easy. Lauren began to live with her mother, happy that now she had a family. Donald often visited them, enjoyed Lauren's company, and listened to her singing with pleasure and awe. Her voice was truly magical, and she often gave him and Mrs. Mitchell concerts, after which they both felt their psychic wounds heal, and it became easier to breathe for the first time after so many years. A few months passed, and Donald realized that he was truly in love again. Lauren reciprocated, and a year later they were married. A little more time passed, and Lauren became pregnant. When it turned out that she was expecting twins, Donald was almost crazy with joy. He surrounded his wife with attention and care, protecting her as the dearest thing in his life. And so it was. Lauren gave birth to 2 wonderful boys. Despite their happiness, nobody in their family has ever forgotten about Beatrice. Her memory was carefully preserved, and every year Donald and Lauren came to her grave. One day they drove to the cemetery, leaving their sons under the care of their grandmother. As they approached the grave, Donald realized he had forgotten the flowers in the car. "Honey, I'll be back in a minute," he said to his wife, and hurried to the car. Lauren touched the cold gravestone with trembling hands and whispered, "I hope you will forgive me my happiness, because I actually live your life. It makes me very bitter." The woman's eyes became wet. Wiping her tears, she continued, "My dear sister, despite this, I am pleased. I love them all very much. Our mother, Donald, and the babies." "Lauren," whispered Donald, "we will never forget Beatrice, and you can never replace her. But you are you, and there is no one like you anymore. I thank God that destiny has brought me together with you. I love you, my dear. I am confident that Beatrice is looking at us from heaven, and she is happy that we have healed each other." They stood like that together, hugging each other, and then, with a feeling of love and gratitude, they placed a bouquet of beautiful, soft cream chrysanthemums on Beatrice's grave and went home, where their sons were already waiting for them. Since childhood, Stuart was a spoiled boy. His father owned several car dealerships and never denied him anything. Mr. Hamilton hoped that the business would eventually pass on to his dreamy son. However, Stuart was interested in something entirely different. He loved to draw and play the guitar, dreaming of becoming a well-known artist or musician in the future. Years went by, and he still enthusiastically told his father about concerts, favourite bands, and new exhibitions at the gallery. "Stuart, have you ever thought about getting married?" his father asked him one day, hoping to rationalise his 30-year-old son and set him on the path of a businessman. "I haven't really thought about it. Why?" Stuart replied carelessly. "I have a business partner with a wonderful daughter who knows how to handle business. She came to the meeting several times in place of her father and took over business," his father suggested. "Are you insinuating that it's time for me to do adult things at your car dealership again?" The guy grimaced. He didn't like the whole idea. They already had a good fortune. Why should he get involved in his father's business and reject the idea of his band? Moreover, things were just beginning to go uphill. Stuart found the whole band, and they wanted to get together for the first rehearsal soon. "No, do what you want." My father reacted calmly and unexpectedly. "I have another plan. Marry Laura. We'll unite the companies." "Are you kidding me?" The son's jaw dropped in amazement. "Son," Mr. Hamilton replied calmly, "I see that you are not interested in business, and I am tired and getting old, but I don't want to give up my business. Let my partner develop it. Marriage is necessary so that our half is behind you. In fact, Laura will be doing everything. And if you'll have children, the business will pass on to them later. Think about it, son. It's a good idea." With these words, 60-year-old Mr. Hamilton got up from his armchair and left his son's apartment, leaving him to digest such a proposal. Stuart was confused. On the one hand, he understood his father's position. All his life he had felt that he was a disappointment to his father. Stuart couldn't comprehend all the workings of the car dealership, such as what services to offer and at what prices to avoid financial collapse and lack of consumers. He was not familiar with concepts like indexing or other terms that casually passed through his father's speech. But Laura was familiar with them. According to his father, Laura could save the business and even develop it. And they wouldn't lose anything because they would enter into marriage. But there was another side to the question. Stuart felt like a simple object, a means of payment for a transaction, and he didn't like it at all. Could his own father sell him for the business? Meanwhile, Mr. Hamilton was driving around the evening city. He decided to leave his son alone so that no one would interfere with his decision-making. The man understood that this was a critical step in his son's life, and unfortunately, he never learned how to make decisions. But how will Stuart live on in this cruel world? Mr. Hamilton loved his son, and he wanted the best future for him. When the businessman met Laura, he realized that this strict girl could make his son a real man who knows exactly what he needs and how to achieve it. Unfortunately, by the age of 30, Stuart never learned this important quality. If he left the business to Stuart, he would abandon it and spend all the money on entertainment. The amount was not small, of course, but the world is huge. Mr. Hamilton sighed, lowered the window and lighted a cigarette. He rarely smoked, trying to keep his health, but his heart was uneasy for his son. The next day, Stuart called his father. He had almost not slept at night, thinking about what decision to make. His head still buzzed with thoughts. He thought about his future and what this marriage could give him. His father had said that the girl was pretty, and it was unlikely that he would cheat. But on the other hand, Stuart felt like a changeable coin. "Hello?" His father's voice came from the receiver. Dad, hi, Stuart coughed. I've been thinking about your words. And? Well, I can't just make an offer at the first meeting like that. I haven't even seen her once, the son shouted in despair. Mr. Hamilton sighed heavily. Don't worry about it. I'll talk to my partner if you agree. He will explain everything to his daughter. No one will force you. Well, if that's the case. Stuart's heart beat so hard, as if he were called to the board for the first time in school and he didn't learn the material. If so, Dad, then okay. I'll do as you said. Excellent decision, son. Approval was heard in his father's voice. Stuart took it as the highest compliment. They said goodbye, and Stuart began to get ready for his first rehearsal with his new band. Several days had passed, and Mr. Hamilton was negotiating with his partner. The deal was profitable, so Mr. Beckman agreed to talk to his daughter. Laura immediately understood what a good offer it was and gave a positive answer. She was not interested in her future husband. He was more like a business partner. If necessary, she would buy out his share and divorce. Mr. Hamilton did care about his son, of course, but if Stuart turned out to be a burden, Laura would not carry him on her shoulders. And, judging by the fact that his son, at 30 years old, did not participate in his father's business, it seemed to be the case. However, this did not scare Laura. At only 24 years old, she had her whole life ahead of her and could afford to spend some time on love games with benefits in the future. In some ways, it all reminded her of investing. She was already familiar with these matters. In the evening, Mr. Hamilton dropped by to his son. They enjoyed dinner while discussing the situation. We are concluding a merger deal, Mr. Hamilton announced importantly. I talked to my partner and his daughter. Laura understood the situation and agreed to the marriage. Your acquaintance is scheduled for tomorrow, so try to make a good impression. Stuart frowned. It's strange, Father. I feel like an instrument. We've already discussed this, Mr. Hamilton said. Yes, I know, and I understand why you took this step. But I don't want to tie my life to someone I don't love. In our time, marriages for calculation are much more common than you think. And I understand that. Do you think I haven't thought this over? I may not understand your business, but I'm not a complete idiot. No one says you are an idiot. If you can't get along after the meeting, we agreed to cancel the deal. So, nothing will change in your life if you don't want it to, Mr. Hamilton said. These words made Stuart believe that his father was not treating him like a tool for the deal. He still gave him a choice, even if that choice could ruin his business. Such a gesture touched Stuart, and he decided to look for any positive trait in Laura that he could hold on to. Stuart couldn't fall asleep at night. His father had said that the girl would be waiting for him in the restaurant at table 17, but he never showed him the photo. Is she really that ugly? By morning, Stuart hadn't imagined a bleak future for himself, and even thought of not going to the restaurant, but he remembered that his father had given him a chance to refuse. I'll go for my dad's sake, decided Stuart, and went to the meeting. Approaching the hostess, Stuart asked, "Hello, I have a table number 17 reserved. Could you please show me to it?" "Yes, of course." The woman behind the counter smiled warmly. Gloomy thoughts still plagued Stuart until he finally saw Laura. She turned out to be a petite girl with cute red curls. However, her face was quite stern, and the glasses gave her an air of seriousness. She was sitting with a laptop and drinking lemonade with ice. "Hi," the guy greeted her. "You're Laura, aren't you?" The girl looked at him over her glasses. Hi, yes, and you're Stuart, I guess. She reached out her hand. Yes. Stuart lightly touched her fingers with his lips. Oh, you are a gentleman, the girl smiled. Sit down, let's chew some food. I haven't even had breakfast yet. What have you been up to? Asked the guy. He liked Laura, and in fact he even felt that she was already in love a little. Business, the girl shrugged. I want pasta and salad, she decided quickly. And Stuart scanned the menu with his eyes. Try the same thing, the girl suggested. The guy agreed, not even realizing that cunning Laura was testing his resolve. Her test did not disappoint her. She was ready for the fact that Stuart was not the most decisive person in the world, although perhaps it was still too early to draw conclusions. By the end of their first meeting, Laura had a clear opinion of Stuart. Although he was a fairly pleasant conversationalist, he was an extremely unserious person. She could not rely on him in the long term. Laura had already decided that she would buy out his share and get a divorce in a couple of years. But for now, the deal seemed profitable. However, Stuart was head over heels in love. The girl's sternness did not discourage him at all. On the contrary, her curls shimmered so beautifully in the rays of the setting sun, and how much she knew. Stuart felt a little ashamed of himself and his creative nature. I have a question for you, said Stuart as they went to the park to chat a little more. Okay, said the girl and smiled. How can such an attractive girl still be without a crowd of suitors? Asked Stuart. Laura looked at him strangely. Stuart, listen, the girl said as she sat down on the bench. Our marriage will be a calculated one. You don't need to pretend to be in love or make any compliments. But Stuart felt like he had just been hit by a cold shower. But I'm not pretending anything. Laura raised an eyebrow. Really? Yes, I really like you. Stuart sat down next to the girl and took her delicate hand in his. I hope I didn't leave you indifferent either. Something stirred in Laura's chest. She didn't want to offend or hurt this guy. He seemed to have really fallen in love. Laura couldn't lie so blatantly about her feelings, so she could only purse her lips. I see. Stuart withdrew his hands and sighed heavily. Can you tell me why? Well, the girl sighed too. You seemed to me indecisive. You know, it's not so bad. A soft character is much better than mine, prickly. Stuart became visibly upset, and Laura felt sorry for him. Listen, I agreed to get married. If you do too, I think I can change my mind. As soon as I saw you, I decided to get married, Stuart unexpectedly replied. Here, Laura smiled. That was a firm decision. Well, I have to go home. I'd like to review the quarterly financial reports. Laura, you know, Stuart suddenly said, a man can not only run a business. Come to my first concert. I have my own band. Maybe you'll like it. I don't even know. The girl answered doubtfully. I don't really like noisy gatherings. Did you want to have a wedding in silence? Stuart grinned slyly. Laura smiled. You got me. Okay, I'll come. Text me the address. Of course. They said goodbye. Stuart was only thinking about how to impress Laura. He wasn't going to give up and was determined to win the girl over. But Laura had strange feelings. Almost for the first time in her life, she was completely lost. After all, Stuart seemed so soft to her, and as they said goodbye, he literally changed before her eyes. Did her impression of him turn out to be deceptive? Stuart rehearsed with his band for a whole month. He was determined to impress Laura, to make her see a strong and decisive man in him. He may not be a business shark, but he is strong in something else. The guy found a club with live music that provided platforms for aspiring musicians to perform. Of course, it was for free, but Stuart himself was ready to pay just to have a place to perform. In addition, he thought that after a few successful performances, they could move up to the next level, namely selling tickets to their show. And thus he too would become a businessman, but he would still be in the field he likes. In short, Stuart was up to his ears in business and fully immersed himself in it. One evening, Stuart's worried father came to visit him. "Thank God you're okay," exclaimed Mr. Hamilton as he entered. "Why wouldn't I be okay?" Stuart wondered. "Are you kidding at me?" grumbled his father. "Your phone has been unreachable for a week. You haven't logged into social media. What are you even doing?" "Oh, that!" The son rubbed his forehead. "It's probably dead. Don't worry about me. I'm just rehearsing a lot right now. I want to give my first concert." "You should have told me about it earlier," said his father. "Okay, I see that you're fine. If you need anything, call me. But don't disappear like that again, okay?" "I'll try my best, but lovers don't watch the clock," Stuart grinned. "Are you in love?" "With whom?" Mr. Hamilton's eyes widened. "With Laura. Who else?" Stuart replied. "Phew!" The father breathed a sigh of relief. "I thought there are so many girls out there." No, I only need her," Stuart firmly declared. Mr. Hamilton was surprised by the changes that had taken place in his son. In this month, Stuart had grown up. He became more serious. Though his father considered his music a simple hobby, progress was visible. Stuart had determined to charm Laura and was doing everything in his power to do so. His behaviour pleased his father. It was a manifestation of decisiveness, which Stuart had always lacked. The day of the concert arrived. Stuart sent an invitation to Laura, and she said she would come at the very beginning. This pleased the guy greatly, and he went to the concert with great excitement. The draw decided that his group would perform first, and Stuart started to find Laura in the crowd. And then he saw her. The fragile girl clearly felt improper, but didn't show it. Laura was sitting at a table on the second floor, which offered a beautiful view of the stage. Stuart wanted to go to the dance floor and have a good time. However, he didn't dare to ask her to do so, as Laura was already quite tense. He decided to let her get used to such places first, and then let her dance. The band tuned their instruments and took the stage. Laura smiled immediately at Stuart, who also smiled. He greeted the audience and then turned directly to Laura, thanking her for coming to the concert and giving him a chance. The boys had rehearsed a lot, so the performance went great, and Stuart hurried to Laura. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited him. Some drunk man was standing at the girls' table. Laura clearly didn't want to talk to him and was pressing herself into her chair. "Hey!" Stuart shouted. "Any problems?" Laura gratefully looked at him. "What problems?" "I'm just getting to know this girl." The drunkard barely spoke. "Go away, this is my girl. Or do you want to sort it out outside?" Blood was pounding in Stuart's ears. He was clenching his fists, preparing for the fight. This was his first serious fight in his life, He had fought with someone else in school once, but was usually a very calm guy who never got into trouble, and now he was about to fight for Laura. No, I'm leaving. No problems. The man held his hands up and stumbled away. Wow, I didn't think you were a chivalry, smiled Laura. It's not chivalry. Anyone would have done the same. Stuart shrugged. He didn't want to tell her that this could have been his first and last fight. But not my ex. Interest shone in Laura's eyes. You've changed a lot during this time. Is that good or bad? It's good. The girl smiled and moved closer to Stuart. With small steps over the next few months, Stuart achieved his goal of winning Laura's heart. He took her to the movies, restaurants, and even found a car museum that amused her. Stuart wanted to show her that their interests could be shared, and he himself gradually became interested in the car business. The documents for the merger of the companies were ready, but Stuart kept delaying the marriage. He wanted to do everything out of love, not calculation. Mr. Hamilton did not rush his son, especially since he saw that Stuart was not going to change his decision. The guy recorded several songs of his band, and his performances became paid. Of course, it didn't bring in millions yet, but the ambitious guy believed that everything was ahead. Besides, Stuart began to understand the intricacies of the car business, not without his father's help, of course, but now Mr. Hamilton was confident about the future of his business and his son. Laura saw all the changes happening to Stuart and could not believe her eyes. In just a few months, the boy turned into a real man. Once, Stuart invited Laura to an expensive restaurant. Romantic music, dim light, her favourite Italian cuisine. The guy had thought everything through. When Laura got out of the taxi, he was ready for his main battle. "I know my words won't be a surprise to you," he began, "but you have literally turned me into another person. I wanted to change for you so that you could be with me and not feel obliged to tolerate me all your life. I want everything to be different from what it seemed at the very beginning. I want us to get married for love." Stuart got down on one knee and opened the ring box. "Will you marry me?" Laura laughed happily and immediately hugged her fiancé. "Of course, Stuart. Of course I agree." 2 months later, they got married. The parents of the newlyweds could not be happier. They had thoughts that their children were unlikely to love each other and would probably not agree to a wedding. But Stuart and Laura looked happy, and smiles did not leave their faces throughout the holiday. Together, they began to manage their parents' businesses, and Laura was surprised that Stuart was just as good at understanding all the intricacies. Stuart chose to leave his band as a hobby and plunged fully into the world of cars. Thanks to his creative nature, he was full of ideas, and practical Laura chose the best of them. The couple formed the perfect tandem in the world of the car business. A year after the wedding, Laura excitedly told Stuart that they were expecting twins. Stuart was overjoyed and immediately told his father that it was time for him to prepare to babysit his grandchildren, which he planned to do in retirement. The couple had a boy and a girl. As the children grew up, Laura and Stuart only loved each other more. They were happy that a marriage of calculation turned into a marriage of love. Sarah was rightly proud of her son. He was tall, handsome, educated, and worked as a programmer in an oil company. It had only been 2 years since he graduated from university, and he was already a department head. And he achieved this all on his own. The talented young employee was noticed because of his professional achievements. Upon hearing the news, Sarah cried tears of joy. Everything turned out just as she had hoped, maybe even better. Her son earned a good salary and took out a mortgage on a spacious new apartment in the city centre. While the renovations were ongoing, Michael lived with his mother, and Sarah was happy about it. Of course, she understood that Michael was already grown up, and soon he would get married and start his own separate life. But for now, the woman enjoyed the closeness with her son. It brought her joy to cook his favourite dishes and iron his shirts. In the evenings, when Michael returned from work, Sarah would ask him about his day, just like when he was in school. Although recently, her son clearly did not hurry home. He definitely had a girlfriend, but for some reason, Michael did not rush to introduce her to them. Of course, Sarah had often thought about her future daughter-in-law. She dreamed of seeing her son next to a successful, educated woman with a well-to-do family. Michael deserved the best, for he himself was a gift of fate, and Sarah played no small role in making her son into the man he is today. The woman knew this and was proud of herself. Sarah gave birth to Michael when she was already just over 40. At first, young Sarah devoted herself entirely to her studies. She didn't want to return to her native village, to the cows and younger siblings. She was going to the university on the economics faculty. She enrolled there thanks to her perseverance and hard work, and that was a chance at the life she had always dreamed of, and her efforts did not go to waste. The young, promising student was helped by the dean. He arranged for her to work as an accountant in a local enterprise under his patronage. It was impossible to get there from the street. "Well, Sarah, now everything is in your hands." The professor smiled at her then. "Don't let me down." Of course, Sarah did not disappoint. She was willing to work day and night, and soon she delved so deeply into all the nuances that even the chief accountant consulted her before making important decisions. Her solid salary allowed her to stay in the city, rent an apartment, and not return to the village. Time passed. Sarah was burning with work. She was constantly taking various courses, reading thematic literature, in short, improving herself. She did not think about her personal life, although hints and even open invitations for a date were regularly received by the pretty Sarah. But she realized that it was too early for a relationship, let alone a family. First, she needed to become financially independent. She had an atypical mindset for a girl of her age. All of her peers at the time only dreamed of a successful marriage, while Sarah only thought about work. Her hard work did not go in vain. 10 years after university, she had saved enough money to buy an apartment. Sarah felt happy spending her first night in her own home. At over 30 years old, she had a stable, high-paying job as chief accountant in a large enterprise. It was time to start thinking about starting a family, and Sarah turned her attention to potential husbands. She had brief, non-committal romances before, which helped her relax from serious work. But now Sarah needed something more, a serious relationship with marriage and children in the future. At that time, women without children at her age were considered almost old maids. There were many men around Sarah, quite worthy, intelligent, but the trouble was that they all wore engagement rings. Those women who were lucky in this regard did not work as hard as Sarah for her financial independence. But as they say, fate will find its way. One night, Sarah was returning home by taxi, delayed from work. It was already late at night. The driver was a charming, talkative young man. He looked about 7 years younger than Sarah, and it turned out that he was. Brent joked a lot, causing genuine laughter from the passenger, complimenting her, and somehow subtly led Sarah to openness, and she told him everything about her life. Suddenly, Sarah realized that she wanted the ride to her home to be long and not end soon. It was easy and pleasant to talk with the charming taxi driver. He too did not want to say goodbye and deliberately chose detour routes. In the end, they exchanged phone numbers. Brent called her the next day, and it all started. Sarah had never felt so desired and loved. It seemed that Brent charged her with his energy and zest for life. Very soon he moved into his beloved woman's apartment and did not hide his joy about it. He used to live with his parents in their apartment. His sister divorced recently and returned to her father's house with 3 children. From now on, Sarah flew home from work on the wings of love, as she was no longer alone and cold. She was always greeted by Brent, who was friendly and very caring. Brent took care of everything around the house, from cooking to cleaning. Nobody had ever cared for Sarah like that. But that love story ended badly. It took Sarah a few years to realize that Brent was simply using her. If it weren't for the accident, she would probably have ignored the warning signs for a long time. Brent did not work as a taxi driver for long after moving in with Sarah. At first, he tried to persuade her that the job was hard and dangerous. Clients could be difficult. Then his taxi company closed. Sarah was initially happy. She wanted Brent to find another, safer job. She was afraid for her beloved, especially when he worked at night. And jealousy was also present. What if Brent met a beautiful young client and fell in love with her? No, Sarah would have not been able to bear this. Her feelings for Brent were too strong. At first, Brent seemed to be looking for a job, studying ads, making calls, going to interviews, but nothing worked out. "Don't worry," Sarah reassured him. "My salary is more than enough. You don't have to rush to find a job yet." And Brent did not rush. However, he sometimes took on odd jobs. He often had to leave at night, sometimes for several days. After such trips, the guy returned happy, and Sarah thought that she understood his feelings. She herself liked feeling financially dependent. She thought that the opportunity to earn money pleased her beloved. But she was wrong. One day, Sarah went to a nearby town for an audit. Brent was working at that time and warned her that he would not be home for at least 2 days. After the audit, Sarah went to a restaurant for dinner, and that's where she saw this ugly scene at the next table. No, it looked very admirable from the outside. The sweet guy looked at the young lady sitting in front of him with loving eyes, stroked her hand, adjusted her hair, and kissed her from time to time. A beautiful couple, a pure feeling. The problem was that this guy was Brent. He didn't notice her, and Sarah was glad about it. Firstly, she didn't want to create a scene in front of her colleagues, and secondly, she needed to gather her thoughts before having a serious conversation, and also to experience this betrayal somehow, to pour out her emotions when no one saw her. At home, Sarah buried her face in the pillow and started crying. After all, she sincerely loved Brent, made plans for a joint life with him, and even came up with names for their son and daughter, which would fit well with her beloved's surname. And now all these dreams were over. But the scene she witnessed put everything in its place. Of course, Sarah understood that this was not normal, that she fully supported an adult man who was in no hurry to find work. A period of a few months of temporary crisis is normal, but Brent had been sitting on her neck for a couple of years now, and these supposed odd jobs were just a cover for such meetings with women on the side. Finally, as always, Sarah pulled herself together, gathered her courage, and kicked Brent out of her apartment and out of her life. At first he tried to justify himself, coming up with the implausible explanations, then swore his love and begged for forgiveness. And only at the end, when it became clear that Sarah was resolute, Brent said what he really had in mind. "What did you want? You're old and I am young. I was drawn to young, beautiful, easygoing girls. And you are cold and bossy. Plus you're fat. Who needs you?" And Brent left, slamming the door. Sarah thought about his words. Was it really true? Was she really so disgusting? After her breakup with Brent, Sarah became disillusioned with all men. Although she no longer wanted to get married, she still had hopes of becoming a mother and planned to have a child for herself. Sarah had occasional relationships solely to having a child, but it wasn't happening. She couldn't seek medical help for her problem because at the time it was considered immoral to plan a child while being single. Sarah eventually concluded that she was infertile and resigned herself to the fact that she would never have a husband or a child. At least she had her job, which was her only outlet. Then, after celebrating her 40th birthday, Sarah finally met her destiny. Gordon, a divorced friend of the company owner, immediately showed obvious signs of attention to the chief accountant. He complimented her, looked at her with admiration, smiled, and one day asked her out. Gordon was vastly different from Brent. He invited Sarah to expensive restaurants, gave her luxurious gifts, and helped her with work. Although Sarah didn't have as strong feelings for him as she did for Brent, she felt desired and loved in Gordon's presence. With him, everything was calm and reliable, so Sarah happily agreed to Gordon's proposal to legalize their relationship. Sarah honestly warned her future husband that she couldn't have children. She was sure of this because none of her attempts, of which there were many, had been successful. But Gordon wasn't worried. He had already become a father. His son and daughter were graduating from university, and he communicated with them and helped them. That was enough for him. Imagine Sarah's surprise when she discovered that she was pregnant. The woman still remembered the wave of warmth and happiness that enveloped her head. The dream that seemed like it would never come true finally became a reality. Gordon was also pleased. He was sure it was a boy and even suggested naming him Michael after his grandfather. And they did indeed have a boy. However, his father never got to see him. Sarah's personal happiness was short-lived. Gordon's life was taken by a sudden stroke. The man, who was just 47 years old and in the prime of his life, was gone. Sarah took a long time to recover from the loss. To cope with her heavy feelings, she was helped by the realization that a baby was growing and developing inside her. She had to be strong for him. Michael was born a little prematurely. He was tiny, sickly, and cried a lot. He took all of his mother's attention and energy. Sarah had to spend a lot of money on doctors, but fortunately she had it. The premature baby had multiple problems, including possible cerebral palsy. But Sarah didn't give up. She searched for outstanding rehabilitation specialists, studied medical news, fought her way into the best medical centres, and it all paid off. By the time he was in school, Michael was not only healthy, but also advanced beyond his years. Medals for prize-winning places in swimming hung over his bed. A piano stood in the corner of the child's room, on which the preschooler already played classical pieces quite well, and shelves were overflowing with colourful children's books. His mother tried to instill in him an interest in reading, and she succeeded. Of course, Michael only received top grades in school and continued to please his mother with his athletic achievements. In middle school, Michael became interested in programming. Sarah supported this useful hobby and bought him a powerful computer, some discs and a bunch of other gadgets. Sarah sponsored her enthusiastic child, and it paid off. Michael soon began to win programming Olympiads. Sarah's heart sang with happiness when her son brought home another certificate. It was then that she realized that her son would go far and achieve much. All of this was the merit of Sarah. She devoted herself to her son, first his health, then his development and upbringing. The woman took him to clubs and sections, went with him to competitions, and combined all of this with her demanding job. Sarah had a hard time without support. Sometimes she looked sadly at the fathers who walked with their children and brought them to kindergarten or school. Gordon would have been a very attentive and caring father. Life with him would have been easier and more pleasant. But it turned out as it did, and now the woman did her best for her son. In late motherhood, Sarah saw many advantages. Young mothers often broke down on their children or neglected them, pursuing their careers, personal life, meeting with friends, going to beauty salons. She, on the other hand, perfectly understood that a child was a priceless gift and did not spare time and effort to develop her son. Michael entered the university and passed, and he studied there for only excellent grades until the 4th year. Sarah always trembled with fear when she remembered that time. Michael was literally replaced by someone else. He gained some strange friends. At first Sarah was even glad. Michael devoted almost all his time to studying, just like she did once. But he was a young guy and he needed to have fun, socialise with peers, and fall in love. When, if not now? The woman did not object to his nocturnal walks. Her heart was squeezed with fear. Her imagination drew terrible pictures. But Sarah did not show her feelings. She understood that it had to be this way. But gradually it got to the point that Michael disappeared in clubs almost every night. He would come back in the morning, happy and on wobbly legs. He would make it to his bed and lay down on it in his clothes. Yes, it was a difficult period. Of course, his studies suffered greatly. The dean of the faculty called Sarah and warned her that if all of this continued, they would have to expel Michael. The woman was shocked. She tried to talk to her son, but he only snarled and rudely replied. Sarah did not recognize her child. Michael was always so polite, so understanding and considerate, but now he was cursing and swearing. There was so much aggression in his words and movements. Sarah tried to influence Michael with money by simply stopping his financing, only giving him money for transport to the university. But his clubbing continued, and soon the woman realized where her son was getting his money from. Several gold chains and rings were missing from her jewelry box. And then it turned out that Michael failed his exams, and he was expelled. It was too much. Sarah caused a scandal with Michael, resulting in him insulting her, slamming the door and disappearing for several weeks. During this time, Sarah was extremely upset and even filed a missing person report, although it was not given proper attention. "He's a young guy. Just out having fun. He'll be back," the policeman assured her. At that time, Sarah quarrelled with the officer, accusing him of indifference and threatening to complain to the prosecutor's office. However, the man turned out to be right. Michael did return home, almost crawling. He looked pale and dishevelled like a homeless person. Sarah understood that her son had problems with drinking. He often couldn't stand on his own 2 feet, spoke nonsense, and responded inappropriately. This was all due to the bad influence of the company he was keeping. Sarah was horrified to realize that she was sometimes afraid of her own son. But, just like many years ago, when she had to care for a premature, weak baby, the woman gathered her strength and decided to act. She wouldn't give up. She would fight for her child. But this time it was more difficult. Michael refused to go to the doctor and wasn't going to break ties with his new friends. "Don't you see that these buddies are dragging you down to the bottom?" The woman tried to reason with her son. "You were the most successful student in your class. You're a talented programmer. So much work has been invested. And are you willing to do this to your life now? Soon there will be no turning back." "But with them I can be myself, not that perfect boy you imagined," Michael retorted. "Finally, I'm free from your pressure. Accept it, and it will be easier." Sarah scolded, cried, pleaded, and tried to talk to her son heart to heart, but nothing worked. It was painful and scary to watch what her loved one was turning into. And there was also a nagging feeling of guilt. She couldn't handle raising her son. It was her failure. She was a bad mother. After about a year of living this way, everything suddenly normalized by itself. This happened after another long absence of Michael. Sarah had almost given up. But a miracle happened. Michael changed again. At first, he started going to nightclubs less often. Then he stopped altogether. Sarah no longer saw her son in that strange state that used to scare her. Michael recovered at the university. His previous achievements helped him. Professors went out of their way to help the talented student, and he even started working again, created websites for companies. Sarah then decided that her son had gone through a transitional period in his 4th year, and after the crisis he suddenly matured, took hold of himself, and everything would be fine now. She played a part in this too, of course. Of course, the parenting conversations apparently did not go in vain. Michael snapped when she berated him, but the right words were deposited somewhere in his mind, and in the end, her son made the right choice. At first, Sarah anxiously watched over her son, afraid that everything would repeat itself. However, Michael behaved impeccably. Once, looking at his mother's worried eyes, he apologized for his behavior. "I understand how much pain I caused you, and I'm ashamed." Michael lowered his head, showing sincere remorse. "I insulted you, took your things, and sold them just to get money for entertainment. And you did so much for me, and I treated you like that." "Son, it's all in the past." Sarah hurried to calm her son and remove the awkwardness. "The main thing is that you realized everything and changed. It was an important life lesson for you. Now everything will be fine." "Yes, now everything will be fine, I promise. And I will definitely return the money for the decoration that I took." Michael kept his word. He graduated from university with honours and got a good position at a prestigious company. Sarah, who had already retired by that time, had connections, but Michael himself coped well with the task of finding a job. From his first salary, he bought his mother gold jewellery, even more expensive than those he once took from her box. He handed Sarah a couple of velvet boxes, embarrassed. The woman said nothing, just hugged her son tightly. They were the closest and dearest people on earth. Time passed, and Michael worked, bought an apartment and started renovating it. Occasionally Sarah travelled with her son. Michael involved his mother into this fascinating hobby, often giving her interesting tours around the country, and sometimes he went with her himself. It seemed that there were no secrets between the mother and son. They talked about all sorts of things and discussed everything in the world. However, Sarah understood that Michael had a girlfriend, about whom he was somehow silent. The woman tried to ask questions, but her son answered evasively, and once said directly that everything has its time. And Sarah stopped asking. After all, an adult has the right to a personal life. There was another forbidden topic for conversation. Michael never talked about what happened to him during that difficult period, why he suddenly changed, what kind of friends he had at that time, what the guy was doing when he didn't come home for days, and most importantly, how he managed to break free from a bog pulling him down. Michael immediately became gloomy and closed when Sarah tried to talk to him, and the woman gradually stopped trying. Sarah sat in her armchair and embroidered, as she had recently taken up needlework. It was a soothing pastime, and the beautiful pictures she created were pleasing. The living room wall was already covered with them. Previously, Sarah was always occupied with her son and work, and there simply wasn't enough energy for such pleasant little things as needlework. The TV was playing in the background, showing the plot of the next soap opera. Not that Sarah loved these sentimental series. She just sometimes wanted to watch something light and unburdening. The years probably take their toll. After all, she is almost 65. Soon, perhaps, grandchildren will come. The phone on the coffee table rang, and Sarah looked at the screen. It was her son calling. "Hello, Mum. I have a request for you. Can you prepare something special for dinner tonight? You're good at many things. Choose something at your discretion." "Of course, with pleasure. Can you be more specific about what you want?" "Mum, it's not for me. We have a guest today. I'll introduce you to my fiancé." "What?" Sarah sat up straight in her chair. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? I would have prepared more. It's such a grand event." "That's why I didn't tell you in advance, so you wouldn't worry and wouldn't come up with anything special. Just prepare one of your favourite dishes, and I'll buy wine. That's enough." "No, it's not enough," Sarah objected. "What about matching napkins and tableware? What about candles? What about decor? I want to welcome your fiancé with dignity." "Mum, what candles?" Sarah felt her son smiling. "Just set the table for 3. Charlize doesn't like excessive formality." "So, her name is Charlize," Sarah said. She suddenly realized it was the only thing she knew about the girl her son loved. Who is she? How old is she? What does she do? Tell me something, at least. "We'll talk about it when we meet," Michael promised. "It will be a topic for conversation. You'll like her. She's nice." Hours passed quickly, and Sarah was busy with pleasant chores. She went to the store for matching napkins and candles, and she needed to buy something else for the table. Sarah baked a goose with apples in the oven, a dish that she excelled at, made a couple of salads, and beautifully set the table by the appointed time. Soon her son and Charlize would arrive. She must be a very worthy and beautiful girl, since Michael chose her. Sarah wondered who her parents were, because she so depended on the family. Would the girl like their apartment? Would she find the ambience too simple? Sarah's heart was pounding with joyful anticipation. Her son said he would introduce her to his fiancé. That meant they decided to get married. What happiness! The time was not far off when Michael would give her grandchildren. Sarah couldn't wait to spoil the little ones. She believed she would be the perfect grandmother, the one that neither she nor her son ever had. Caring, loving, attentive. Finally, the sound of the door opening was heard. Sarah went to the hallway to greet her guests. Her son came into the apartment first. Behind him was a young girl, slender, pale, and shy. In her hands was a simple leatherette bag, and on her feet worn ballet flats from a Chinese store. Sarah immediately noticed these details. "Welcome, dear guests." The woman found the strength to smile. Charlize modestly sat next to Michael. Sarah sat opposite the girl. She was cute, of course, delicate like a deer. Michael looked even more masculine and strong next to her. The woman could fully understand what attracted her son to this young creature. It turned out that Charlize was a couple of years younger than Michael. After graduating from nursing school, she worked in a private clinic. Sarah began to ponder. The profession is certainly noble and necessary, but why not become a doctor instead of a nurse? Either Charlize lacks ambition, or she was lazy, or she was not smart enough. None of these options are good. Then Sarah found out that Michael and Charlize had been dating for several years. They met at a bus stop during rainstorms, which seemed quite original and even romantic in the era of internet dating. "Fate brought us together," Michael said with exaggerated solemnity, and then added seriously, "Charlize is my guardian angel, the love of my life." The girl smiled shyly, and Sarah felt a pang of jealousy. Then she asked Charlize about her family, and it turned out that the girl had come to the city from a village to study. Her parents are poor, and they have 4 more children besides Charlize. During her studies, the girl lived in a dormitory and worked part-time since the scholarship was not enough to cover her expenses. After graduation, she got a job, and life became easier. There were funds for rent, clothes, and food. Later, she accidentally met Michael and realized that she had fallen in love. No wonder you fell in love, Sarah thought to herself. He's a guy with an education and a good job, an ideal option for someone like you. Sarah realized that her son was Charlize's only chance to escape poverty. Perhaps it was Michael's success that attracted her. Despite her modesty and upbringing, Sarah felt dislike towards Charlize. She's pretending to please me, the woman decided, and after the wedding she will show her true face. But it's okay. I will talk to my son. He doesn't notice anything now because of his strong feelings. To avoid putting her son in an awkward position, Sarah pretended to be friendly. Michael, in turn, appeared to be in love and happy. Sarah understood him. She was once in love too. Many years ago, a charming young taxi driver, Brent, had also made her head spin, and it took her several years to realize that he was using her shamelessly. Sarah didn't want such a scenario for Michael. After dinner, Michael went to see Charlize off to the taxi. Sarah found the strength to smile goodbye, but Charlize noticed the true emotions of her future mother-in-law. Sensitive person, but most importantly, the son did not understand anything, thought Sarah. Sarah dreamed of a different life for her successful and promising son, not a poor girl who didn't even have a higher education. She planned to talk to him cautiously so as not to hurt or push him away. "Well, what do you think of Charlize?" Michael asked when he would return home. "She's charming, isn't she?" "Cute, yes." Sarah didn't argue. "And is it all serious between you two?" "It couldn't be more serious. I love her more than life itself, and we're getting married by the end of the year. That's my decision." "But maybe you shouldn't rush it? Date, go out. Who's stopping you? But a wedding, it's a very serious commitment." "Mum, what's wrong with you?" Michael nervously blinked. "Don't you like Charlize? What's wrong with her?" "She is a poor girl from the village," said Sarah, finally decided to be honest. "She has no high education, no prospects. You're her ticket to a comfortable life. I don't want you to be used." "Do you think I can only be loved for my car, apartment and salary, and I'm nothing by myself?" "What? I don't mean that at all," Sarah protested. "You're the most wonderful person. You deserve the best. But Charlize, she's not the right match for you. Don't rush. You'll find a bride who suits you better. I never told you, but there was a time in my life when I had an Alfonso sitting on my neck. It was painful and humiliating." "Mum, don't talk about her like that," Michael said reproachfully, and Sarah immediately understood that if she continued in the same vein, she would lose her son's favour. He was too charmed by Charlize now. "And remember yourself, you're from the village too, and from a poor family. You and Charlize have a lot in common." "Not so much. I didn't try to improve my financial situation by marrying a rich man. I achieved everything myself." "Mum!" Michael said in a chiding tone. "Okay, sorry," his mother sighed. "Since you've chosen her, she must be perfect." "You'll like her someday, when you get to know her better." Michael finally smiled. After this conversation, Sarah tried many times to dissuade her son, hinting to him that he shouldn't rush, that he should look closer at his bride-to-be. But Michael remained unyielding. He claimed that he loved Charlize and that their feelings were tested by time. He also begged his mother to treat his fiancée kindly. Sarah tried very hard not to show her dislike, but sometimes she just couldn't help herself. "Why didn't you get a higher education?" Sarah asked Charlize once. This question kept bothering her. Her friends already knew that her son was preparing for a wedding, and of course they asked about the bride. Sarah even felt a bit awkward answering their questions. and now she wanted to put Charlize in the same uncomfortable position. "I had to work," the girl shrugged. "After I finished nursing courses, I was asked to vacate the dormitory, so I had to work. You can't study at a medical university remotely. I couldn't combine studying with work." Sarah shook her head, thinking to herself that the girl was just lazy. In her own time, she had worked from dawn until dusk and had not relied on a rich boyfriend to improve her financial situation. The young couple decided not to have a lavish wedding, instead choosing a dinner with the closest friends at a restaurant before flying off for a beach vacation. Sarah was upset with this because she had dreamed of a grand celebration with the bride in a white dress and veil, her handsome son in an elegant suit, family and friends on both sides. After their honeymoon, the newlyweds moved into Michael's apartment, which he had already renovated. At first the young couple visited Sarah often, but their visits dwindled and eventually stopped altogether. "Have you forgotten about me completely?" Sarah asked her son indignantly during a phone call. "You're always nitpicking at Charlize," Michael explained. "That's why we don't come over anymore, to avoid irritating you unnecessarily." "She's turning you against me," Sarah replied. "Mum, I love Charlize, and I love you too. Don't make me choose between the two. It's hard." Sarah did indeed try to criticize Charlize every chance she got. She often commented on Charlize's clothing, her inability to discuss art and literature, her loud spoon clanking against a cup while stirring sugar, and her loud laughter. Sarah tried to say these comments as friendly advice, and Charlize didn't seem offended, or at least didn't show it. However, she probably voiced her feelings to her husband later. With each passing day, Charlize annoyed Sarah more and more. "She's pretending to be modest. These villagers from a poor family are so cunning, worldly wise, and experienced that it was probably easy for her to deceive my respectable, intelligent son. It was probably an easy task for her," complained Sarah to her friend. One day, Sarah had a strong stomachache that made it impossible to breathe. She decided not to wait in line at a state clinic and instead went to a good private clinic. Within an hour, she was sitting outside the doctor's office. How different private clinics were from the state ones. Smiling staff, a friendly atmosphere, stylish interiors, no unpleasant people, no horrible smells. Sarah was asked to wait for 5 minutes, and she settled on a soft leather couch, opening a magazine lying on the table. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. "Please, come in. Leonard is waiting for you," Charlize said with a smile to a patient. What a coincidence! Sarah had unknowingly scheduled an appointment at the clinic where her daughter-in-law worked. For some reason, Sarah didn't want Charlize to notice her now. She quickly covered her face with the magazine while watching the pretty nurse closely. Charlize exchanged a few words with a colleague at the reception, signed some documents, and then the doctor, a handsome tall man, came out of the office. Sarah didn't like the way he was looking at Charlize at all. The doctor couldn't take his eyes off the nurse, clearly enamoured with her. He asked Charlize a question and she responded, bringing a smile to the doctor's face. Was she flirting? Sarah found it hard to breathe. How disappointing for her son. He picked up a poor girl and she's playing around at work in gratitude. The doctor approached Charlize and spoke to her again, his gaze leaving no doubt that he was head over heels in love. Charlize replied briefly and hurried down the hallway. The man was watching her until she disappeared into one of the rooms. The scene Sarah had just witnessed was shocking on one hand, but on the other, she was glad. After all, she was right about Charlize. The examination by the therapist and ultrasound showed that everything was fine with Sarah. She was pleased with the result, But now an entirely different question occupied her mind: how to open her son's eyes and save him from this greedy, unfaithful woman. As a mother, she had to do something right now. Sarah called her son. "How are you doing?" The woman started. "How's family life?" "Everything's great," her son replied. "Are you sure?" "Mum, that is a strange question. Of course I'm sure." "I was at the clinic today where Charlize works, and I had an ultrasound done. Yes, everything's fine with me. I'm not calling about that. You should have seen how one doctor was staring at her, just devouring her with his eyes." "And what's wrong with that? My wife is beautiful. It's normal for men to look at her. It even flatters me." "I wouldn't be so happy if I were you." Sarah no longer tried to choose her words carefully. "Charlize was openly flirting with him, smiling at him. You can't trust her." "Mum," Michael's voice became firm, "are you at it again? Charlize is the only person I can trust. Our relationship has stood the test of time." "And what about me?" Sarah was stunned. "So you can trust her but not your own mother?" "In recent times I'm not so sure about you," Michael admitted. "You seem too vehemently against my happiness." Inside Sarah, a mixture of anger and annoyance was boiling. But what could she do? Life will put everything in its place. From that day on, she started to consider Charlize not only a village gold digger and a lazy person, but also an unfaithful wife. How else? Sarah had eyes, and she clearly saw how her daughter-in-law was flirting with a doctor at work. Of course, Michael will find out later and understand that his mother was right, and the boy will face a big disappointment and pain. Sarah decided to celebrate her 65th birthday grandly. She couldn't have a lavish wedding, but her soul demanded a grand feast. Therefore, the woman booked a large hall in a restaurant, paid for a luxurious dinner, and invited dozens of guests, former colleagues and friends. Of course, she invited her son and daughter-in-law, although she didn't want to see Charlize, but then Michael wouldn't have come either. The celebration was great. The host entertained the guests with fun contests and jokes, and the waiters served delicious dishes on time. Sarah glanced at her daughter-in-law, who probably had never been to such parties before. Charlize was quiet and modest, seeming a bit shy. Sarah was pleased with it. Of course, the country girl felt out of place in decent company. Meanwhile, the guests took turns, saying kind words about Sarah and listing her career achievements. They praised her ability to make friends and her strong character. Sarah was melting with pleasure. It was nice that her loved ones noticed her merits and appreciated them. Then it was time for her son to make a toast. He got up with Charlize. Sarah looked at Michael and was charmed by his handsome appearance. He looked like a Hollywood actor in his jacket and shirt. Michael spoke touching words of love for his mother and praised her for all she had done for him. Suddenly, he said something that surprised everyone, including Sarah. "But our biggest gift to you will be in March, when you will come to the maternity hospital for your grandson." There was applause, congratulations reigned, people smiled, someone even shed a tear. Charlize looked down shyly, while Michael encouraged her by hugging her shoulders. Only Sarah sat with a stony face, unhappy thoughts swirling in her head. In March, that means Charlize was about halfway through her term, and Michael told her only now, as if she were a stranger. Instead of being happy that the grandchild she had long dreamed of would soon appear, Sarah felt an unpleasant feeling that she had become a secondary character in her son's life. And all because of whom? Because of the village girl who flirts with doctors at work while pregnant. Later, Sarah regretted her behaviour. But what's done is done. When everyone calmed down a bit, Sarah got up from her seat and asked that terrible question. "Michael, Are you sure the child is yours?" At that moment, the scene from the clinic was clearly in Sarah's mind. The doctor devouring the daughter-in-law with his eyes, charming Charlize, smiling back at him. Sparks were clearly flying between colleagues, but what else could Sarah think? The toastmaster tried to turn everything into a joke. He succeeded to some extent. The guests laughed, but her son, Michael's face froze, pain and disappointment freezing in his eyes. Charlize first blushed to the roots of her hair, then turned around and left the room without looking back. Michael, giving his mother a disappointed look, hurried after his wife. Sarah suddenly realized that her son was now truly angry with her. The guests behaved as if nothing had happened, enjoying themselves, singing songs, participating in competitions. Everyone preferred to ignore the awkward moments, not to spoil the celebration. An old friend came to Sarah and supported her. Her son had recently divorced, and his wife had received half of the property, which she had nothing to do with, and now she was not allowing her former mother-in-law to see her grandchildren. "I wish I could have been as brave and direct as you were in my time," the friend said, shaking her head and hugging Sarah by the shoulders. Michael got offended. "How can we make peace with him now?" asked upset Sarah. "Truth is too unpleasant. That's why it stings the eyes. Don't worry, he's your own son. He'll understand everything, and his mother will always forgive him," comforted the friend. However, Michael seemed to have no intention of forgiving his mother. Sarah tried calling him several times, but he ignored her calls and then even blocked her number. 2 months passed, and Sarah couldn't find peace. She missed her son and wanted to hear his voice and see his beloved eyes. She longed for their heartfelt conversations and walks together. The woman regretted what happened on her anniversary, but she didn't change her opinion about Charlize. On the contrary, she became more convinced that the child was not Michael's. Charlize was afraid of being exposed, so she prevented communication between mother and son. Sarah would have told him everything she saw. He would have found out that her suspicions were not unfounded, and he would have doubted her. Meanwhile, Michael had erected an invisible barrier around his family and did not let his mother, once his closest and beloved person, inside. Sarah had never felt so lonely before. If something happened to her now, it seemed that no one would notice. But then one day Michael came to her house unannounced. He opened the door with his key and walked into the hallway as if nothing had happened. Sarah was sitting with her handicraft in front of the TV at that moment. His unexpected appearance excited and pleased her. Sarah jumped up and her embroidery fell straight to the floor. Michael looked calm and determined. Such a grown-up, real man. How she missed him. "Michael, you've come!" exclaimed the woman, trying to embrace her son, but he evaded her. "Mum, we need to talk very seriously." "About the incident on the anniversary? I regret it myself, really." "Well, then maybe you'll come with me now to our place and ask Charlize for forgiveness." "Ask Charlize for forgiveness?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "I'm not guilty before her. I wanted to ask for forgiveness from you. I should have told you the truth about your wife in private. You know, I saw her." "So, you still don't understand anything?" Michael interrupted, looking at his mother with bitterness. "Okay, it's my own fault. I should have told you right away when I noticed you didn't like Charlize, but she stopped me. She asked me not to worry you unnecessarily, and she didn't want to look like a saintly saviour in your eyes. But since that's the case, make some tea." Michael suddenly asked, settling on the couch. "We're going to have a very long conversation. You need to know a lot." Michael began the story when a new student joined their group during their 4th year. Barry wasn't doing well academically, to put it mildly. He had barely managed to get back after being expelled and was a couple of years older than his classmates. Well-mannered Michael was immediately taken aback by Barry's free communication style. Barry would even crunch on chips during lectures without responding to the lecturer's remarks. He would often argue with teachers, answer phone calls during class, and leave the classroom in the middle of a lecture. He also skipped class frequently. Barry was not very social with his classmates, and he made it clear that he thought they were too young and inexperienced to be friends with someone as cool as him. He was constantly receiving phone calls, and from the snippets of conversation, it was clear that he regularly attended parties, went to nightclubs, and travelled. Michael felt a twinge of envy towards Barry. He even had a special gait that was free and relaxed, unlike Michael, who had always strictly adhered to the framework set by his mother. She had instilled in him the belief that well-mannered, decent people should behave in a certain way. Michael tried to follow her teachings, but now, looking at Barry, he realised that life could be lived differently. What did Michael have? Studies, home, work on the internet, trips with classmates to the cinema or bowling, occasional dates with shy girls, and interesting books. These were the only things that made up Michael's grey weekdays. On the other hand, Barry seemed to be living a fuller and more vibrant life, one that he had chosen for himself, not one that was imposed on him. Michael had seen violators of discipline before, but they were just clowns trying to attract attention with their behaviour. Barry was different. He didn't seem to care about others' opinions at all. University life looked grey and insignificant in comparison to Barry's interesting life. Michael realised that it was time to change something, and that he was tired of living by imposed rules. He didn't want to lead a miserable existence as a model student anymore. He felt that life was passing him by, and nothing bright or interesting was happening. After university, it would be work, followed by marriage and children. This was the life script that his mother had planned for him, and it didn't include any entertainment, fun, or adventure. Barry became an example for Michael to follow. He began to copy his manner of speech and gestures, sometimes unconsciously. Once, Michael even dared to answer a teacher rudely who made a remark to him. The students were surprised, as nobody expected such behaviour from him. Barry turned around and looked at Michael with clear interest, even conspiratorially winking at him. During the break, Barry approached Michael. "You seem to differ from this herd of sheep," he said, deliberately stretching the words. "They're humiliated, but they're silent." "I'm not like that," Michael reassured, pleased with his idol's praise. "Then it must be fun with you." Barry slapped his classmate on the shoulder. "Come to the nightclub tonight. We often hang out there with friends." Of course, Michael went to the club that night. He really wanted to experience the fun life that his new classmate led. Before, Michael did not like nightclubs. They were dark, stuffy, smoky. The music was loud and the dance floor was overcrowded. If he were to be honest, Michael did not enjoy dancing either. He had been to clubs a few times with friends to meet girls, but the ladies preferred other guys just like Barry and his acquaintances, light, open, confident, daring and decisive. But today Michael felt just like that. Barry and his company accepted Michael as their own. They drank, danced, and their group was replenished with beautiful girls. In the presence of Barry, Michael felt like a real macho. The words flowed from him and the girls listened attentively and admired. It was just great. Closer to dawn, Michael felt exhausted. Barry's friends seemed to have tired too, but then one of the guys pulled out a packet from his pocket. "This is for energy," he said to Michael, who was surprised. The others didn't need explanations. "Don't worry," Barry reassured him. Herbal ingredients, no chemistry, natural product. We need a little refreshment. The evening is in full swing and we're already exhausted." Michael realised what Barry was offering him and was worried about it, but he couldn't refuse in front of everyone. After some time, Michael felt an unprecedented surge of strength. He felt like a hero in a movie, beautiful, confident, pumped up, capable of any feat, even climbing a multi-story building on the wall. It seemed that anything was possible. Then consciousness turned off. Michael woke up in a garage on an inflatable mattress. Next to him, covered with a blanket, lay a beautiful but apparently overdone, unfamiliar girl. Several young men and women, including Barry, were also sleeping here. Some were on an old couch, some were on the same mattress as Michael, and some were just on the floor. Michael did not remember what had happened. His head was pounding, everything was spinning before his eyes, and nausea rose in his throat. Yesterday was good and fun, but it seems that now the reckoning was coming, and Michael was ready to pay this price for a bright, unforgettable evening. "Wake up, bro," Barry croaked, turning over to the other side. "You passed out abruptly last night. We even thought of calling an ambulance, but you're fine now." Since then, Michael began to communicate with Barry and his friends. These were entirely new feelings, unlike anything he had experienced before. Michael now felt much more confident and learned to behave more freely. Much of what had seemed important before had now lost all value. For example, dreams of a career. Previously, Michael was shy about meeting girls, didn't know how to behave with them, and was embarrassed in their presence. Now, in the company of Barry and his friends, he easily made acquaintances for 1 or 2 evenings, following the example of his new acquaintances. Drinks may have played a role, but also someone in the company always had something interesting to eat. All of this made the world brighter, sensations sharper, and emotions more vivid. Michael now hardly communicated with his friends from his past life. What did they know about real fun? These losers were only interested in the upcoming session and exams. Michael was influenced by Barry's calmness, who didn't worry about studying at all. He had other, more interesting plans. Barry planned a grand party at his parents' country house, and Michael was invited. The guy eagerly awaited the appointed day. The event promised to be not boring. The only thing that spoiled the fun was his mother, or rather her constant complaints. Previously, Michael had not noticed how stuffy and unpleasant she was, but now he found himself irritated by her constant preaching. Sometimes he caught himself thinking that to interrupt the flow of tedious moralizing, he was ready even to hit his own mother. One day he almost acted on these impulses when he raised his hand to her. His mother initially looked scared, but then surprised. That day, Michael's body was breaking down, and his head was hurting from a night spent partying with friends. And here was his mother with her eternal advice. So he almost snapped. Another issue was money. Before, Michael had made money by creating websites for various companies, and his mother generously gave him pocket money. Although he wasn't rich, he never felt a lack of funds. However, he no longer had the time, energy, or desire to work part-time, and his mother stopped giving him money. She only provided him with enough for transportation and food every day. And Michael needed the money because fun didn't come cheap. One day, Michael remembered that his mother kept a box of gold jewellery on the top shelf of the linen closet. He had known about it since childhood, and he decided to steal it. He took some jewellery to the nearest pawn shop and soon became a regular there. Strangely enough, he didn't feel guilty about it at the time, as he was focused on getting the money he needed to maintain his lifestyle. Apparently, his brain had already begun to degenerate. True, he did not realise it at the time, and did not regret anything. Michael failed the session and did not show up for exams, just like Barry. When his mother found out, it caused another scandal, which finally pushed Michael over the edge. He swung at her again and probably would have hit her in the face if she had not dodged. Sarah turned pale, covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Michael saw his mother crying for the first time, but even this sight did not make him come to his senses. He waited for her to go to the store and snuck into her room. The same box was there. He still had time to go to the pawn shop, and he needed money before it closed. Michael wanted to distract himself, relieve the tension, have some fun, or anything to avoid the unbearable feeling of irritation. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited him. Sarah discovered the missing jewellery and hid the box. Michael then turned everything upside down in the apartment, throwing books off the shelves, emptying drawers and dressers, and even checking the cupboards. All in vain, as the casket was not there. In anger, Michael smashed several plates and rushed out of the apartment, which was already starting to feel like a prison to him. He went to Barry's garage, where his friend was recovering from last night's party. Neither of them looked excellent. Michael shared his problems with his friend about having no money, unable to stay at home, and how his mother doesn't even let him breathe calmly. "What's the problem? Live here in the garage for now," Barry suggested. "This is my residence. My relatives haven't looked here for a long time. Live as long as you want. And about the money, I have an idea." The idea turned out to be nothing more than a suggestion to break into a local grocery store that closed at 7 in the evening and was guarded by an old man. Barry distracted the guard while Michael quickly cleared the warehouse. Boxes of cereals, sausages, canned goods and drinks were all stuffed into a huge bag. Then they took all the loot to some man in an apartment, who counted out a few bills for them. Michael realized that Barry had been doing this for some time. Well, never mind. Now they had money for the evening, which, by the way, had already come. Michael lived in a garage for about a week, during which he drank a lot and felt bad. He already didn't like his new life, but he couldn't go back to the old one. At some point, he stopped realizing reality altogether and suddenly found himself at a bus stop on the outskirts of the city. How did he get here? Why was he shivering so much and breathing so hard? And, most importantly, what should he do now? With no strength to think, Michael lay down on a bench and decided to let whatever happens happen. Morally, he was already prepared for the worst. His passing from life. Strangely enough, this scenario almost didn't scare him. It was cold and raining with snow, and a piercing wind was blowing. People had long been sitting at home, and there was nowhere to wait for salvation. Would anyone help a dirty, ragged, homeless person like Michael? He realized that they would probably just think he drank and fell asleep and pass him by. And then a miracle happened. A beautiful young girl suddenly leaned over him with worried eyes and an excited voice. The girl looked so pure and noble, especially compared to the ladies that Barry had been spending time with recently. "Are you feeling unwell?" asked a stranger. "Should I call an ambulance?" Michael muttered something incoherent. The girl immediately took out her phone from her coat pocket and called an ambulance. While waiting for the paramedics, the stranger measured Michael's pulse. Fear was visible on her face. The guy concluded that his business was bad. But despite the pain, nausea and dizziness, he wanted to admire the girl's kind eyes. The ambulance arrived quickly and they loaded Michael into the vehicle. The girl held his hand and spoke encouraging words the whole time. To Michael's great joy, she went with them. It turned out that even in such a state, he could find the reasons for joy. Michael was saved by a miracle. You should be grateful to this girl all your life. She saved your life. Another couple of minutes and that would be it, the doctor said strictly to Michael. Michael nodded in agreement. Speaking was still difficult for him. Do you want me to tell someone where you are? Michael shook his head. No, my mother can't know about this for anything. She just won't be able to handle it. Michael understood that she would definitely end up in the ICU with a heart attack. It's your right, you're an adult, so you decide. By the way, if this happens again, you probably won't survive it. You were lucky this time, but you need to get treated urgently. Think about my words. Michael thought and decided that he would be more careful about the number of pills he used. Many people used them, and he saw it every day, so he knows the measure. Nothing terrible will happen. Michael dreamed of getting out of the hospital as soon as possible to meet Barry. He missed the fun, laughter and carelessness. The hospital walls were oppressive and the procedures were exhausting. By the way, none of his new friends visited Michael in the hospital, although he called Barry as soon as he could and told him where he was. Barry sympathized over the phone and said that yes, it happens. He only asked not to mention his name to anyone and not to talk about others. Meanwhile, Charlize, the girl from the bus stop, came to see Michael several times. It turned out that she was also a nurse, so she could quickly and accurately assess his condition. The first time Charlize visited Michael was to find out how he was doing. She was afraid that they hadn't saved him. Finding out that everything was fine, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. Somehow, imperceptibly, Michael told Charlize about everything that had been happening to him lately. The girl listened attentively, without interrupting. During his monologue, Michael realized how terrible his story sounded. He was ashamed of himself. He was kicked out of university, ruined his relationship with his mother, took her jewelry, and hung out with a bad crowd. The guy thought that after his words, Charlize would get up and leave. Decent people needed to stay away from people like him. But to his surprise, the girl stayed with him for a long time. On that day, until the end of the visiting hours, they talked about abstract topics, and Michael admired her beautiful face, slender figure and charming smile. Charlize came to visit him a few more times and apparently enjoyed talking to Michael. One day she opened up to him and shared her story. It turned out that Charlize had come to the city from a village, having grown up in a penniless and large family. Despite the challenges, she always studied well and worked hard. She had two dreams: to escape poverty and to help people. Both of these dreams had come true, as she had managed to finish school and become a nurse, helping people every day. Charlize was proud that she had worked hard and didn't depend on anyone. Compared to her story, Michael's life seemed even less attractive. She had achieved so much despite not having any support, whereas Michael's mother had always been there for him, and Michael could not even finish his studies at university. Conversations with Charlize made Michael think about his life and reconsider his views on things. Being around Barry's friends no longer seemed as appealing to Michael. Charlize herself was like a magnet to him, and he never wanted to say goodbye when it was time to part. The best part was that she seemed to feel the same way. Michael wondered how such a pure, beautiful and noble girl could find anything to love in someone like him. She had seen him when he was pathetic, twisted and vomiting after drinking too much. Nothing but disgust could have come from this sight. But instead, Charlize started to feel sorry for him and show concern. She even visited him in the hospital to check on his condition. Maybe she saw something in him, something for which he could be loved. Michael had long felt disgust towards himself. After leaving the hospital, Michael went back home. His mother never found out that he had spent a week in the hospital, thinking that he had just been wandering around, like he often did lately. He and Charlize continued to meet and talk on the phone. Talking to her made Michael feel exhilarated, and he felt better and cleaner. Michael knew that Charlize was an attractive girl, and passers-by's glances during their walks confirmed this. Even Andrew at the clinic where Charlize worked offered to date her. Michael had seen this doctor once when he met Charlize after work and realized that Andrew had been in love with her for a long time. A young man with sharp facial features and a sporty figure, deemed intelligent and successful, was passed over by Charlize in favor of Michael, a failure who was expelled from university and nearly died. It was nothing short of a miracle that they ended up together. After Michael was discharged from the hospital, Barry appeared on the scene once again, inviting him to the club to celebrate his recovery. And Michael agreed. He honestly tried to start a new life, but despite his efforts, he found himself drawn back to his old habits and yearning for the oblivion they brought. He missed that feeling. Amidst the fun, Charlize called. She somehow sensed that Michael was in danger and demanded that he leave immediately. Michael hesitated. He was having so much fun and was certain nothing bad would happen. "Either you come to me now, or we will never see each other again." Charlize's voice was firm and decisive. There was no doubt she was serious. Michael surveyed the hall, a crowd of dancing people, loud music and cigarette smoke rising in the air. Memories of Charlize and her smile flashed through his mind. He remembered Andrew's sad look when she took Michael's arm on the porch. Michael blinked and the scene changed. Now he lay resigned at a bus stop, facing his own inevitable end. An anxious, beautiful face leaned over him. Michael called a taxi and went to Charlize. The choice was easy. Charlize hugged him tightly, pressing against him. "I was afraid it was too late, that I would lose you again," she admitted. "I'll never hang out with them again," Michael replied, stroking her shiny red hair. "I don't need anyone in my life except for you." And the man kept his promises. Whenever Barry or anyone else from the company offered to have a good time, Michael responded with a categorical refusal. Soon his former friends gave up on him, and Michael began to rebuild his life. He returned to university, started studying again. He tried very hard to become independent as soon as possible and make a beloved proposal. His mother couldn't have been happier with her son, who had made up his mind. It seemed to her that he had realized his mistakes and made the right choice. Michael and Charlize decided not to tell her what really happened. It was too scary and ugly a story. Michael didn't introduce Charlize to his mother because he wanted to present her as his fiancée, not just a girl from the street. He felt it was the right thing to do. Finally, 2 years after graduating from university, Michael realized that the material base was ready and he could start a family. He made a proposal to Charlize, and although it wasn't a surprise for her, it made her pleased. However, there was only one hitch with meeting Michael's mother. Charlize immediately realized that his mother didn't like her. Sarah, of course, tried to hide it, but it didn't work out very well. Michael believed that everything would change after the wedding, but it only got worse. Charlize pretended that everything was fine, that his mother's behavior didn't bother her at all, but Michael saw that his wife was really struggling with the situation. The man himself sincerely wondered how anyone could not like Charlize. She was perfect, beautiful, kind, loyal, caring, and brave. How could one not understand that it was a great fortune to meet such a unique person? Michael hoped that the news of their grandchild would change his mother's attitude towards his wife, which is why he didn't tell her about Charlize's pregnancy, waited for the solemn moment. Although Charlize doubted that it was a good idea to announce such news to everyone, Michael assured her that it would have greater effect. The man was taken aback by the hurtful words his mother had spoken. That night, He spent a long time calming down his upset wife and berating himself for his foolishness. Charlize had been right all along. He should never have told everyone about her pregnancy in public. He had thought it would make a beautiful surprise and an expensive gift for his mother's anniversary, but it had turned out to be ugly instead. Since then, the young couple had cut off communications with Sarah. Michael was deeply offended by her words and refused to answer her calls. Charlize urged him to reconcile with his family, reminding him that he would never be happy or at peace otherwise, and that she didn't want that for him. A bad peace is better than a good quarrel, and then, after all, the baby will be born soon, Charlize reminded. Children should not grow up in an atmosphere of hostility, she said. Sarah was stunned. She realized that she could have lost her son forever. He had been so close to leaving this world. She remembered his behavior during that difficult period. He was aggressive, strange and cold. Michael had been completely disinterested in his education and career, and had only been concerned about money, even taking most of her gold jewelry to pawn. Sarah had blamed his dissolute lifestyle and youthful maximalism, but it turned out that the matter was much more serious. He had almost died. Charlize had saved him twice, first by calling an ambulance at the bus stop and then by giving him an ultimatum when he was at the club with Barry. Michael could have easily returned to his old ways, but Charlize's love and faith in him had stopped him. Sarah sighed deeply, tears welling up in her eyes. She was experiencing a mix of emotions: belated fear for her son, guilt towards the girl who had saved him, and immense gratitude towards her. "What have I done? Charlize probably won't forgive me now," Sarah said, confused. "You don't know her at all," Michael smiled. "I've told you many times she's wonderful and unique. I'm lucky to have met her." Sarah nodded. "Now I understand how lucky we are to have her."